the name of God. Amen. I, Eustace Wentworth, of Skelbrook Hall in the parish of Skelbrook in the Moors, in the North Riding of the county of York, gentlemen being of sound and disposing mind, memory and understanding, do hereby make and ordain this my last will and testament in the manner following, that is to say, first, I direct that my body shall be decently buried in the parish churchyard of St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors, beside the grave of my late mother, Mrs. Honoria Wentworth, departed this life 22nd April 1779, at the discretion of the Reverend Theophilus Tregarth, curate of the said parish, with such monument as Mr. Septimus Hetherington of York, my executor, shall direct, the cost not to exceed £20 sterling. Second, I give, devise, and bequeath to my great niece, Miss Augusta Wentworth, only surviving child of my late nephew, the Reverend Augustus Wentworth, lately curate of St. Mary's of Thirsk, now of the parsonage of Thirsk, in the said North Riding, the whole of my real and personal estate, comprising A. The dwelling house called Skelbrook Hall, together with the home pasture of 174 acres, the walled garden, the apple and pear orchard, and all hereditaments and appurtenances thereto belonging. B. The contents of the South Library, being 412 volumes principally classical and theological, the Wentworth family plate of 96 pieces, and all household goods and chattels at Skelbrook Hall. C. The further sum of £3,800 in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England, to hold the same in fee simple absolute, to her own sole and separate use and behoof, with no reservation, no life interest, and no entail. Third, to my faithful housekeeper, Mrs. Margaret Tetlow, of 32 years' service at Skelbrook Hall, I give 12 months' wages above the customary annual stipend, with the warm and considered hope that my great niece shall continue her in her place, the said keys having never been better kept by any housekeeper in the north, riding these 30 years. Fourth, to my steward, Mr. Hubert Lurk, I give £2 and the small Dollond pocket spyglass that has lain in the South Library writing-table drawer these 11 years. And to the Reverend Theophilus Tregarth, parish curate, I give the worn brass standish of my late mother, in token of his patient kindness at my long autumnal decline. Fifth, I nominate, constitute, and appoint Mr. Septimus Hetherington of Stonegate, York, attorney and solicitor at law, sole executor of this my last will and testament, in witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and seal this 4th day of October, in the year of our Lord, 1819. Eustace Wentworth, seal. Signed, sealed, published, and declared by the said Eustace Wentworth, as and for his last will and testament, in the presence of us who at his request, and in his presence, and in the presence of each other, have hereunto subscribed our names as witnesses. Theophilus Tregarth, curate of Skelbrook in the Moors. Hubert Locke, steward of Skelbrook Hall. Mr. Hetherington set the document level upon the green baize, and laid his pen across the upper margin, and let the 9:30 January morning hang at the room for a long, unhurried moment before he raised his eyes. It was the cool, pale blue Thursday morning of the 6th day of January in the year 1820. The window at the further wall of the chambers at the corner of Stonegate and Petergate admitted the thin North of England winter light across the writing table and across the 3 folio law books ranged at the wainscot wall beside the door. A beeswax candle burned at the further side of the writing table, though the morning was light enough by the window. Mr. Hetherington had lit it at 8:30, as was his manner on these January mornings when the eye must read a will aloud, without faltering at the longer Latin formula. The room smelt of beeswax, and of the dry old leather at the folio bindings. Outside, the bells of York Minster had rung the 9:30, some 4 minutes since. Mr. Hetherington, 61 years of age, gold-rimmed spectacles at the bridge of a careful Yorkshire nose, folded his hands at the further side of the green baize and regarded the young lady in the chair opposite. Miss Augusta Wentworth was tall, 5'7", and upright, with the gentle gravity of the Yorkshire moor-edge parsonage. Soft, mid-brown hair, plaited at the nape, under a plain dark morning cap, calm hazel-grey eyes, a soft, careful temper unhurried in its asking. Dressed in unrelieved black mourning gabardine for her late great-uncle, the testator. Her gloved hands lay folded at the green baize before her. Her leather travelling case rested at the floor at her right foot. She had heard the will read through without interruption and without alteration of her countenance. "I am very much obliged to you, Mr. Hetherington," she said in a level Yorkshire voice. "I have followed it. May I ask you to set out for me, in such order as you find convenient, the family connection? It is the first matter I would wish to lay before you, Miss Wentworth." Mr. Hetherington drew toward him a second folio at his left hand. "The testator was the younger brother of your late grandfather, Mr. Bartholomew Wentworth, of the parsonage of Thirsk, who died in 1811. They were schooled together at Coxwold. They parted in the autumn of 1781, when Mr. Eustace, at 43, took the writership of the East India Company at Madras and sailed from Gravesend for the Coromandel coast, and your grandfather Bartholomew remained at Yorkshire with the family living at Thirsk." "I had heard the year 1781 named once at my late father's hand," Augusta said. "I had not the particulars." "Your great-uncle was at Madras 34 years," Mr. Hetherington went on. "He rose by careful degrees to the merchant grade in 1798, and at 73 returned to Gravesend in the autumn of 1815, and took up at Skelbrook Hall, which had been kept in his absence by Mrs. Tetlow, the housekeeper, under his agent's hand at York. He never married. He died at his bed in the South Chamber on the 11th of December last at the age of 79, of a long autumnal decline." Augusta inclined her head a careful fraction. "From his return to Yorkshire in 1815 to his death," Mr. Hetherington said, "he kept up a correspondence with your late father, the Reverend Augustus Wentworth at Thirsk. One letter at each of the 4 English quarter days, by the ordinary Yorkshire post, the post-boy's ride taking 3 days in the dry summer and 4 in the longer winter. He never travelled the 27 miles to Thirsk in person. Your late father, in his autumnal illness of 1815 to 1816, was not able to ride to Skelbrook. They wrote of the parish, of the home farm, and, your great-uncle's own particular phrase, at his letter of midsummer 1816, of the careful child at the South Parsonage parlour window. That is the phrase he wrote of you at his quarter-day letter to your father of midsummer 1816. I had not seen the letters at my late father's papers. Your late father kept them, I have reason to believe, at his own writing table at the parsonage. I had not seen them either. Your great-uncle kept the corresponding sheaf at the South Library writing table at Skelbrook. I have them at my own desk now, under seal pending your direction. There are 19 letters in the sheaf, of which 16 are in your late father's hand." Augusta drew one careful breath and let it out at the same even measure. "You will pardon me, Miss Wentworth, for the 4 days the express from York to Thirsk has been on the road. The will was opened at these chambers on the 15th in the presence of Mr. Locke and the Reverend Trigeth. The probate was granted at York on the 28th, and I sent up to Thirsk by the 1st January post the formal notice of the bequest. The boy was 4 days at the road, by the winter snow at the Hambleton crest. I had hoped he should reach the parsonage by the 3rd. I understand from your note returned by the post-chaise yesterday that he came up at 2:30 of the morning of the 4th. He came up at 2:30 of the morning, Mr. Hetherington. I was at the south parlour window at the time. Mr. Hetherington's gold spectacles inclined a fraction. He did not at that hour press the matter further. Augusta lowered her gloved hand to the leather travelling case at her right foot, drew it up at her knee, and unlatched the brass clasp. She set the case open at the floor beside the chair. From the inner pocket, she drew a small calf-bound notebook, 4 inches by 6, the calf worn at the corners, the leather darkened at the spine by 7 years of careful handling, and set it level at the green baize at her right hand, beside her gloved fingers and beyond the folded edge of Mr. Hetherington's writing pad. She did not open it. The worn cover bore at the upper right in her own neat italic, very faded now, Galilean moons, etc. A W. Thirsk, begun January 1813. Mr. Hetherington regarded the notebook for a careful, unhurried instant. He did not ask after it. He waited her question. "I have one particular point, Mr. Hetherington. The will is dated the 4th of October last. I should be obliged to know whether at that date my late great-uncle was at Skelbrook Hall in his own settled mind, in the curate's judgment, and whether the witnesses are at this present hour content to attest the soundness." "The witnesses are content to attest it, Miss Wentworth. The Reverend Tregarth and Mr. Locke were present at the writing of the will at the South Library on the 4th of October last. The Reverend Tregarth has written me by the post of the 17th of December an attestation in his own hand that he found the testator in clear and settled understanding of every particular clause. Mr. Locke has signed the corresponding attestation. I have both papers at the further folio at my left hand. They are at your inspection, if you wish it. It is enough that you have them at your folio. Mr. Hetherington, I am content. Then I shall proceed to the particulars I have to lay before you." He set 5 things, one after the other, at the green baize between them, with the deliberate, unhurried hand of a man who had laid such things at the green baize many times in his long Yorkshire practice. The first was the true copy of the last will and testament, signed and sealed under Mr. Hetherington's hand as executor. The original lodged at the Prerogative Court at York. The second was a sealed personal letter from Mr. Eustace Wentworth to his great-niece, entrusted to Mr. Hetherington at the writing of the will and not since opened. The wax was the crimson Wentworth wax with the B at the centre. The Wentworth B her late grandfather had used at his letters from Thirsk all the years of her childhood. The third was a draft on the Bank of England for the sum of £3,800, made out at the order of Mr. Hetherington in favour of Miss Augusta Wentworth, and payable at the Threadneedle Street office. The fourth was a brass ring, an unornamented Yorkshire smith's ring some 3 inches across, threading 6 iron keys of varying size, the great south door, the south library, the housekeeper's still room, the strong room at the half-basement, the orchard gate, and the inner garden gate at the walled south garden, each tied with a thin linen tag in Mrs. Tetlow's careful hand. The fifth was the calling card of the Reverend Theophilus Triggath, curate of Skelbrook in the Moors. I leave each of the 5 at your hand. The papers and the draft and the keys you may carry away with you this morning. The personal letter is yours by the testator's own direction and unopened by my hand. The keys I had from Mrs. Tetlow by Mr. Locke's hand at the 20th of December. I have written to Mrs. Tetlow at the 3rd of January to give her notice that you shall be expected at Skelbrook at the earliest convenience your own arrangements will admit. I shall set out by the Saturday after next, Mr. Hetherington, if the roads will admit it, the 15th of January. It shall be a careful 9 days. The Hambleton crest will hold the snow at this season. I should be obliged if you would take the chaise by Northallerton and Stokesley, and not by the upper road. I had it in my mind to take the chaise by Northallerton. You are very particular, Miss Wentworth. I find I am obliged to be. Mr. Hetherington inclined his head a fraction. He folded the folio at his left hand, and laid the pen at the inkstand and laid his gold-spectacled gaze at her again, across the green baize. "There is one further matter, if I may detain you a moment. Your great-uncle had read in your father's letters of the refractor at the south parlour window at Thirsk, Mr. Dollond's 3-inch achromatic of 1798, and of your careful keeping of the lunar phases and the 4 moons of Jupiter at the long Yorkshire winter evenings. He named the matter at his letter to your father of Michaelmas, 1818, and again at Lady Day and Midsummer, 1819. He was content that the south library window at Skelbrook should keep you as the parlour window at Thirsk has kept you. The south library at Skelbrook has its window full upon the south, with the horizon clear of the upper fell. Mr. Locke's report at the 2nd of January attests it. I had not known that he had read of it. He had read of it. He had written of it. I leave the further particular at the sealed letter. It is not at my office to lay it open at your hand. I am obliged to you." She drew the 5 things at the green baize together at her gloved hand and set them one after the other at the inner pocket of her travelling case. The true copy of the will, the sealed letter at the Wentworth crimson wax with the B at the centre, the bank draft, the brass ring of 6 iron keys at its careful linen tags, the curate's calling card. The calf-bound Galilean moon's notebook she returned last to the inner pocket beside them and latched the brass clasp at the case. He rose. She rose with him. He walked her at his careful, unhurried pace to the door and down the wooden stair to Stonegate, where the post-chaise she had hired at the Black Swan that morning waited at the cobble. The bell of St. Helens had just rung the 10:15. The thin north of England sun lay along the wet flagstones at the chamber's stoop and along the brass plate at the door, Mr. Septimus Hetherington, attorney and solicitor. She paused at the cobble. "I shall write to you from Skelbrook at the Saturday next." "I shall be obliged to you, Miss Wentworth. Travel safe." He saw her into the chaise and closed the door at her gloved hand and stood at the cobble until the post-chaise had turned at the corner of Petergate. The post-chaise carried her south from York by the Tadcaster Road and arrived at the south side of the Thirsk Green at 20 minutes past 4 of the afternoon. The Yorkshire winter light was nearly gone at the western sky. The lamps were lit at the windows of the parsonage. Mrs. Skelton, at the further side of the green, raised a hand at her arrival, but did not cross. Augusta paid the postboy at the door, set her travelling case at the flagged passage, and went through the dim, familiar parsonage to the south parlour window, where the refractor stood at its alt-azimuth tripod beside the writing-table. She drew off her gloves and laid them at the edge. She set the bank draft and the brass ring of keys and the curate's calling card and the true copy of the will into the drawer at the writing-table and turned the key in the brass escutcheon. The sealed letter she kept at her hand. She set the letter at the writing-table beside the brass eyepiece of the refractor. The Dollond eyepiece her late father had laid in her own hand the autumn of 1816. And stood a moment at the south parlour window in the low last light of the January afternoon. The south horizon at Thirsk gave upon the leafless lime walk at the parish gate, the south wall of the churchyard, and the long pale fell beyond. Jupiter would rise in some 3 hours at the southeastern quarter. She had it noted at the notebook for the evening of the 6th of January, 1820. She would be at the eyepiece by 7:30 if the sky held clear. She broke the crimson Wentworth wax at the letter with her father's small ivory letter knife. The wax cracked careful at the B. The folded sheet within was a single quarto leaf, written close at both sides in a slow, large, kindly hand, the downstrokes a little uneven, the ink the brown of long, warm summers at the South Library writing-table at Skelbrook. Skelbrook Hall, the 4th day of October, 1819, at the South Library writing-table in the warm, late-summer Yorkshire afternoon. To my great-niece, Miss Augusta Wentworth, only surviving child of my late dear nephew, the Reverend Augustus Wentworth. My dear young lady, I write a small letter that an old Yorkshire gentleman of 79 years has been minded to write at his own unhurried quarter-day, these 4 years past. Your late father wrote me at the Christmas of 1815, in the second letter of our renewed brotherly correspondence, of the small refractor by Mr. Dolland at the South Parsonage parlour window at Thirsk, and of the careful child of 27 years, who had kept by it the lunar phases and the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter at every cloudless evening of the long Yorkshire winter. He wrote me of it again at Lady Day 1816, the last quarter-day at his hand. I had not, in the 34 years of my Madras keeping, seen any astronomical eye trained at the southern night sky at the Yorkshire Upper Fell. I had not known that the eye was at Thirsk Parsonage in the careful keeping of my own great niece. I leave you Skelbrook, my dear, and the South Library, and the South Library window, which has its horizon full upon the south and clear of the Upper Fell. Mr. Locke will tell you that Jupiter at his winter elevation rises at the southeast at the small pasture gate, and stands at 9:30 of the cold January evening at the height of the south sash. I have it as my careful settled wish that you should continue your observing at the South Library window at Skelbrook in the same Yorkshire fashion in which your late father's letters have these 4 years told me of it at Thirsk. The Dolland is the small instrument of your father's hand and is yours. I leave you the South Library window and the south sash also, and the cold January evenings at it, in the quiet hope that the careful keeping of your hand shall not now be put down at the door of any other house. Your great-uncle, Eustace Wentworth, written at Skelbrook Hall this 4th of October, 1819. She read the letter through twice. She held the letter level at the writing-table and laid her gloved hand at the brass eyepiece beside it, and stood at the south parlour window in the last pale light of the 6th of January. Her late father had not, in any of his quarter-day letters to her great-uncle these 4 years past, written her of the matter. She had not known he had written of the refractor at her hand. She had not known her great-uncle had read of it. She had not known the South Library at Skelbrook had a window full upon the south, with the horizon clear of the Upper Fell. She knew it now. She folded the letter at its careful original folds and laid it at the drawer at the writing-table beside the true copy of the will and the bank draft and the brass ring of 6 iron keys and the curate's calling card, and turned the key at the brass escutcheon and set the key at the inner pocket of her black mourning gabardine. The Dolland eyepiece she returned to the lined box at the writing-table beside the refractor. The calf-bound Galilean moon's notebook she set level at the writing-table at her right hand for the evening's observing. The Yorkshire winter dusk gathered at the south parlour window at Thirsk. The bell of St. Mary's rang the 4:30. Augusta drew off her morning cap and laid it at the chair at the wall, and stood a careful, unhurried moment at the south sash. Jupiter would rise at the southeast at 7:30. She would be at the eyepiece. The morning of Saturday the 15th of January dawned cool and pale blue over the parsonage at Thirsk, with a thin January wind moving along the lane and the first frost still upon the gate. Augusta Wentworth had risen at 6:30 and had stood for some quiet moments at the small parlour window where her late father's refractor was kept on its wooden alt-azimuth tripod under its plain linen cover. She drew the cover free of the brass tube, as a farewell only she would name. She wiped the eyepiece with the inner pouch of linen at her belt. She laid the tripod down and folded it close in the long mahogany case her late father had brought from London in the spring of '98. The case she set in the larger trunk at the foot of the parlour, with the small calf-bound notebook of the Galilean moons wrapped close at the inner pocket of her travelling case, where it would not be jostled by the post-chaise springs upon the road. Mrs. Skelton had come over from the reading school with a folded letter at her hand and a brief blessing at her temper, and the two friends had sat at the small kitchen table over weak tea and a piece of plain dark bread, and had said little. There was little needing said. Mrs. Skelton had been Augusta's principal these 4 years at the parsonage school, and her steady kindness had been as the dry stone wall is to a walker, not effusive, but a thing the walker may put a hand to and find unmoved. Mrs. Skelton would write Wednesdays. Augusta would write Sundays. There was no more to be said than this. And they did not say more. The post-chaise was at the parsonage gate at 8:30. It was a plain dark green chaise, drawn by 2 grave Cleveland bays, and the postilion was a sober man of middle years in a plain dark-caped greatcoat. Augusta's trunks were lifted up at the back. The small mahogany case of the refractor was placed within the chaise itself, at the seat beside her, with the travelling case at her right hand and the brass ring of 6 Skelbrook keys in the small pocket at her belt. Mrs. Skelton stood at the parsonage gate, with her plain dark wool shawl about her shoulders, and inclined gentle as the chaise moved off. Augusta inclined back. The lane turned at the elm, and the parsonage was lost behind the hedge, and the road bore north toward the moor edge under the cool January sky. The journey lay in 3 measured parts. The first lay from Thirsk to Northallerton, across the wide expanse of the Vale of York, with the long line of the Hambleton Fells at the right hand under their thin coat of January frost. The chaise moved at the 8 miles in the hour the postilion held to in winter, and the country went by at the window, in dark hedges and leafless elms, and the wheel of a winter rookery above a coppice. Augusta sat upright at the seat, with her gloved hands quiet in her lap and her plain dark mourning bonnet at her head, and she looked out at the country with the same attention she had been used to give her father's small parlour window at Thirsk. There was no agitation in her temper. There was the inward composure of a reader given a page she has long meant to read, and is at last permitted to read. The chaise wheels turned upon the frost-hardened road. The breath of the bays rose white at the morning air, and 1 mile of the vale followed another in its own time, asking nothing of her. They reached Northallerton at 10:30. The postilion drew up at the Black Bull, and Augusta stepped down for breakfast. The inn parlour was wainscoted in dark oak, with a small fire at the hearth. A country woman in a clean linen apron set before her dark bread, cured ham and weak coffee. Augusta ate slow and without remark. She was not hungry. She was attentive. At the inn parlour window, she could see the postilion at the bays, and beyond the yard the slate roofs of the lanes, and farther still the rise of the eastern fells where Skelbrook lay, another good day's drive beyond. She took out from the travelling case the small calf-bound notebook of the Galilean moons. She did not write in it. She only laid her gloved hand upon its worn calf cover for the space of a minute. Then she returned it to the inner pocket, and was at the chaise step at the half-hour. The second part of the journey lay from Northallerton north-east towards Stokesley by the country road that runs along the south flank of the Cleveland Hills. The road was steeper here, and the wind came cold and steady down off the open fell. Augusta watched it all with the same gentle attention. The country was not unknown to her. She had been at Stokesley once with her late father in the summer of 14, but she had not been at it in winter, and the winter aspect of these hills had a grave severity to it she found by some reason of her own temper more composed than the soft summer aspect. The fells in winter said only what they were. They came into Stokesley a little before 5, with the early winter dusk already at the edge of the slate roofs. The King's Head stood at the corner of the marketplace, a low, whitewashed inn with a sober oaken sign. The landlord, a grave Yorkshireman in a plain dark coat, inclined and led Augusta into a small first-floor chamber at the south side, a plain panelled room with a 4-poster bed, a writing table at the window, and a fire already laid. Augusta thanked him gentle. She washed her face. She took her supper of mutton and bread at the writing table, with the small notebook at her right hand. The cloud had thickened over Stokesley. She would not observe tonight. She wrote one short line, date, inn, cloud cover, temperature, the direction of the wind. Then she set the pen down and slept. The third part of the journey lay from Stokesley southeast through the Moor Edge villages and down at last into Bilsdale to the parish of Skelbrook in the moors. They set off at 9. The cloud lifted, the sky cool pale blue. The chaise climbed up the south flank of the hill and then bore east along a high lane between dry stone walls, with the open fell at either hand. The wind here was higher and cleaner. The country lay open and grave. The postilion held the bays at a walking pace at the steeper turn, and at the high lane settled them again to the even 8 miles in the hour. Augusta watched the moor go by with the steady attention that had been her temper all the long day, and as the chaise turned at last down through the south coppice toward the Honeystone Manor at the lower edge of the fell, the clock at St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the moors struck 3. Skelbrook Hall stood at the south slope of the Hambleton fringe above the beck, plain in the cool January light. It was a manor of 1738, 2 stories above a half-basement of pale honeystone, with a low slate roof, 3 brick chimneys, and stone-mullioned sash windows ranged at the south face. The south porch was plain and unadorned, of the same honeystone, with a sober pediment and a stout oak door black with January weather. A walled garden of perhaps 3/4 of an acre lay to the west. Beyond that, an apple and pear orchard of leafless branches stood under the cool sky. The home pasture rose at the north behind the house, in a long climb of stone-walled field to the open fell. The chaise drew up at the south porch. The oak door opened. A man stood at the threshold. Mr. Skell, the Skelbrook butler, was a grave man of 58 in a plain black tailcoat. He inclined at the chaise step. He gave his name in a sober Yorkshire voice. He saw the trunks taken down to the inner hall by 2 underservants. Behind him stood Mrs. Tetlow, the Skelbrook housekeeper, a woman of 56 in a soft plum bombazine gown and a clean lace cap, with the brass household keys at a chatelaine at her belt and a settled kindness at her temper. Behind Mrs. Tetlow stood Mr. Locke, the steward, a weathered man of 60 in a plain dark woolen coat, with the country quietness of one who has walked a home farm 40 years. Each of the 3 inclined. Each of the 3 gave Augusta their welcome at the south porch in the composed fashion that asks no question and lays no claim. Augusta returned their welcome with an inclination of her own and a few sober sentences of plain thanks, and she stepped over the threshold into the inner hall of Skelbrook Hall. The hall was wainscoted in dark oak to the height of a tall man's shoulder, with a plain stone floor and a quiet turn of stair to the upper story at the east. A small fire was lit at the hall hearth. Mrs. Tetlow led Augusta first to the south library, which lay at the southwest corner of the ground floor, with 3 stone-mullioned sash windows ranged along its south face. The room was wainscoted in oak to the same plain height. The walls above were lined floor to ceiling in dark walnut bookcases of the 1738 build. A long oak writing table stood at the centre under the pale January light from the south windows. A fire was already laid in the hearth at the east wall. The south windows had to the south a clear horizon for Jupiter at its winter elevation, exactly as the late Mr. Wentworth had spoken of it in his letter, exactly as he had settled his own wish. Augusta stood a quiet moment at the centre window, and she looked out at the south slope above the beck and at the low pale blue rim of the sky beyond. Then she turned to Mrs. Tetlow and asked in a gentle voice whether she might be left an hour at the south library alone. Mrs. Tetlow inclined and withdrew. Mr. Skell sent in the small mahogany case with the direction of one who had been told what it contained. Augusta closed the door. She drew up a chair at the south window. She knelt at the case and undid the brass clasps and lifted out the Dolland achromatic refractor, the 3-inch brass tube with its achromatic objective by Dolland of London at the year 98, The wooden alt-azimuth tripod folded close at its side, the small linen pouch with the cleaning cloth and the eyepiece. She set the tripod open at the south window. She lifted the tube and set it on the tripod cradle. She set the eyepiece at the draw tube. She squared the alt-azimuth to the south horizon, and she settled the brass tube at the elevation that would, when winter Jupiter rose later in the evening, catch the planet plane at its rising. The refractor stood at the south library window in the pale January light, and was at home there, as it had been at home at the parsonage parlour at Thirsk, and the late Mr. Wentworth's settled wish was thereby kept. She rose from the tripod, and she drew up at the long oak writing table at the centre of the room. She took from the inner pocket of her travelling case the small, worn, calf-bound notebook of the Galilean moons. It was a thin, octavo book, bound in calf the colour of dark honey, the cover worn at the corners by 7 measured years of hand use, the spine soft, the edges of the pages a little smoked at the inner margin from the parsonage candlelight at the long winter evenings. She laid it down at her right elbow at the long oak writing table, and she opened it at the first blank page after the last Thirsk entry, and she drew a line under the Thirsk entry, and she wrote in even italic the date and the place, Skelbrook Hall, Saturday the 15th of January, 1820. She closed the book again. She set her gloved hand upon its worn calf cover for the space of a minute, as she had done at the Black Bull. She had come, by measured stages, to the place from which her future observing would be made, and she had brought with her the record of all her observing past. Mr. Hetherington had sent up by post a brief inventory of the estate, and Mr. Locke, at the steward's office at the South Yard, kept the books in even country hand. The inheritance lay thus, and need be set down once, and not repeated. 174 acres of upland fell and stone-walled lower meadow, 22 cattle, 14 Cheviot sheep, 3 Cleveland Bay carriage horses, 2 riding mares, and 4 sheepdogs. The 1738 hall itself, the steward's cottage at the South Yard, the walled garden of 3/4 of an acre at the west, and the apple and pear orchard at the western edge. The 412 volumes of the South Library, principally classical and theological, with a run of Hooker, Tillotson, and Paley, and a small but serviceable shelf of astronomical works, including a clean copy of Vince's Complete System of Astronomy and Ferguson's plates, the Wentworth family plate of 96 pieces in silver marked York, 1788, and the further sum of £3,800 in the 3% consolidated annuities at the Bank of England. To this, Augusta Wentworth had succeeded in absolute fee, with no reservation, no life interest, and no entail, by the wish of her late great-uncle the testator. The rest of that Saturday went in the steady work of arrival. Mrs. Tetlow took Augusta through the upper story at 4:30. The south chamber at the head of the stair, which Mrs. Tetlow had had aired and warmed these 3 days, was to be her own. The second south chamber at the east was to be kept for any guest the parish should send. The small north chamber at the corner was a sewing room. Augusta thanked her gentle. They went down again to the south parlour, where supper was set at 6:30. A plain country supper of mutton and winter potatoes, and a piece of cheese from the home farm. Mr. Skell waited at the door. Mr. Locke had returned to the steward's cottage at the South Yard with the settled kindness of one who has done his day's work. Augusta ate slow, and she retired at 9 to the south chamber, and she slept her first night under the slate roof of Skelbrook Hall. The days from the 16th to the 31st of January went in the settled rhythm a country household keeps in the deep of winter. Breakfast at 8:30 in the south parlour, the morning at the long writing table at her quarter-day correspondence, an hour at the home pasture with Mr. Locke if the weather held, a country dinner at 2:30, the afternoon at the South Library reading shelf or at the household ledgers with Mrs. Tetlow, supper at 6:30, and the South Library evenings at the refractor when the sky was clear. That was the rhythm. It was not different from the rhythm she had kept at the Thirsk parsonage. Only the South Library at Skelbrook was a larger room than the parlour at Thirsk, and the horizon at the south windows was wider, and the household round her was composed and asked little. The first Sunday came on the 16th. At 10 the Skelbrook chaise was at the south porch, and Augusta went down with Mrs. Tetlow in plain dark morning gabardine and a black bonnet, and they were driven the short half-mile to St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors, the parish church at the foot of the lane above the beck. It was a low, honey-stone church of the same 1738 build as the hall, with a plain square tower, a slate roof, and a small churchyard at the south. The Wentworth pew was at the north aisle, second from the chancel. Augusta took her place, gentle. Reverend Theophilus Trigath, in a plain black gown and gold-rimmed spectacles, read the morning service in an even Yorkshire voice. His sermon was upon the text of the second chapter of Ecclesiastes, that of the patient labour of the hand in its season, and was delivered without flourish, in plain sentences that ran, perhaps, the half-hour. After the service, the parish gathered in the small south porch and received Augusta in the composed gravity of a moor-edge village that has been 100 years used to looking sober upon the comings and goings of the hall above the beck. Mr. Trigath inclined, the parish clerk inclined, the countrywomen inclined, and gave Augusta their welcome with no question and no display, and Augusta returned each inclination with one of her own. She was driven back at noon, and took her country dinner at the south parlour with Mrs. Tetlow at the head of the table. In the afternoon, she sat at the long oak writing table at the South Library, with the green-ribboned bundle Mr. Hetherington had forwarded by post on the Friday, the half-correspondence of the late Mr. Wentworth, being the letters he had received from her father, the Reverend Augustus at Thirsk, over the 26 years from 93 to 19. The letters had been kept close at the desk drawer of the South Library writing table by Mr. Wentworth himself, and Mr. Hetherington had had them tied at the close of the funeral in the green parsonage ribbon her late father had used at his sermon folders. Augusta untied the ribbon herself. She read at the rate of perhaps 8 letters in the hour, in measured order from the earliest. They were the measured quarter-day letters of a country curate to a brother who had returned to Yorkshire at last. The weather, the parish, the school, the harvest, a sentence or two each year as Augusta grew, the death of Honoria in 8, the small troubles of the parish in the war years, the gentle quiet of the peace, the long autumnal decline at 16, the last short letter in October of 19, with the news that the Reverend Augustus had finished his last sermon and would write no more. Augusta read them through to the close. She tied the ribbon again. She set the bundle in the desk drawer at her right hand. She did not weep. She set her gloved hand upon the green ribbon for the space of a minute, and then she rose to her feet. The week from the 17th to the 21st went in the settled work she had begun. On the Tuesday, she walked the home pasture with Mr. Locke, and saw the cattle in their winter byre, and the Cheviot sheep at the lower meadow, and asked the patient questions a new mistress should ask of a steward of 80. On the Wednesday she sat with Mrs. Tetlow at the household ledgers, and went through the country bookkeeping of the past 4 quarter-days. On the Thursday she wrote to Mrs. Skelton at Thirsk, and to Mr. Hetherington at York. On the Friday she received Mr. Trigath at the south parlour at noon. For the country half-hour the parish curate is owed by the new mistress of the parish hall, and she found him a grave man of 49, with a quiet kindness and a sober eye at the South Library shelf, when Mrs. Tetlow took him a moment through it. On the Saturday morning, the sky cleared cold and the wind dropped, and Mrs. Tetlow remarked at breakfast that the night would be cloudless. It was so. The evening of Saturday the 22nd of January came cool and clear over the south slope of the Hambleton Fringe, with no cloud at the south horizon and the first stars rising one by one in the cold, pale blue dusk. The air was still. The temperature at the south parlour window dropped a degree the half-hour from sunset onward, and the thin curl of smoke from the home farm chimney rose straight in the cold winter air. Augusta supped at 6:30. At 9 she lit a single candle at the long oak writing table and turned the candle gentle to the east so it should not be at the south window. She drew up at the refractor. She set the eyepiece. She turned the brass tube even upon its altar-zimuth and squared it at Jupiter, which lay at perhaps 30 degrees of elevation in the south-southeast, plain as a small, steady yellow disk above the dark line of the moor. The 4 Galilean moons stood ranged about the planet in the order she had been 7 years used to read: Io at the inner east, Europa next out, Ganymede at the inner west, Callisto a long interval further out at the west. She watched at the eyepiece in quiet. At 9:30, the small dark round of an Io shadow transit began to move across the equatorial band of the planet, a small dark dot at the inner east limb, moving by measured minutes toward the center disk. Augusta stepped back from the eyepiece, took up her quill at the long oak writing table, opened the small calf-bound notebook of the Galilean moons at the page she had ruled on the 15th, and wrote, in even italic, Saturday, 22nd January, 1820. South Library, Skelbrook Hall. Clear. Wind south-southwest. Temperature at the window. 34 Fahrenheit. Io shadow transit. Ingress at the inner east limb at 9:30. Planet at 30 degrees elevation south-southeast. She set the quill down. She set her gloved hand upon the worn calf cover. The first Skelbrook entry was made. Her observing past and her future were, by the keeping of that single page, joined at the South Library writing table of the hall her late great-uncle had left her. In the following week, Mr. Hetherington's clerk forwarded the second wave of papers, the Bank of England receipts for the £3,800 in the 3%, with a schedule of the 4 quarter-day dividends and the proper endorsements at the proper hands. Augusta read them through with Mr. Locke at her side at the long writing table on the Tuesday afternoon. She countersigned where Mr. Hetherington had marked. She returned the packet to the post for York at 4:30. On the Saturday following, the 29th, Mrs. Tetlow came up at 3:30 to the South Library with a small dark walnut case in her hand and laid it down at the long writing table. It was the family plate cabinet's inner case for the Wentworth pearls. Mrs. Tetlow opened it. Within lay a single moderate row of pale pearls of perhaps 120 in number, in even order on a small bed of dark velvet, with the silver clasp marked York at the year 88. Mrs. Tetlow said gentle that the pearls had been the late Mr. Wentworth's mother's, and had been kept at the family plate cabinet these 40 years, and that the late Mr. Wentworth had said at the close of October that the new mistress should have them at her hand whenever she was minded to wear them. Augusta thanked her gentle. She did not put them on. She let them rest in the open case on the writing table a settled minute, the pale row catching the cool light from the south window, and then she closed the case and gave it back to Mrs. Tetlow and asked that they be kept at the cabinet as before. Mrs. Tetlow inclined and withdrew. The Saturday the 31st of January came cold and grey, with a thin drizzle over the south slope and the beck running full at the lower meadow. Augusta spent the morning at the home pasture with Mr. Locke under a plain dark wool cape. She saw the cattle in their byre and walked the lower meadow to the dry stone wall. She heard at his hand the question of the southeast hedge and gave him her assent to its mending in the spring. She returned at 1:30. She took her country dinner at 2:30, and at 3:30 She sat down at the long oak writing table at the South Library, with Mr. Locke's country quarter-day account before her. The account ran to 12 pages in even steward's hand, with the rents of the home farm, the small payments due at the village, the household disbursements at Mrs. Tetlow's chatelaine, the wages of Mr. Skell and the under-servants and the grooms, the tithe due to Mr. Trigath at the parish, the small charity at the village school, and a settled balance at the close. Augusta read each page through. She put a small italic mark at the margin where she had a question, and she set the questions to Mr. Locke at her side. And Mr. Locke gave his measured country answers, and she was satisfied. At the foot of the 12th page, she dipped her quill in the small inkstand at her right hand and signed in even italic, Augusta Wentworth, Skelbrook Hall, 31st January to 1820. It was the first quarter-day account of her keeping. She set the quill down. She closed the ledger. She set her gloved hand soft upon its plain dark cover for the space of a minute. The cool grey winter light from the south window fell quiet upon the long oak writing table, upon the worn calf-bound notebook of the Galilean moons at her right elbow, upon the brass ring of 6 Skelbrook keys at her belt, and upon the settled hand that had, by the steady asking of 3 weeks at the south slope of the Hambleton fringe, become the hand of the hall. The Wednesday came in clear and cold over the home pasture, and the upland fell above Billsdale Beck, and the south face of the Honeystone Hall took the pale winter light along its stone-mullioned sash windows at 9:30 in the unhurried fashion the 2nd day of February kept at Skelbrook in the year of our Lord, 1820. Augusta had been at the South Library writing table since the first hour after breakfast, the calf-bound observing book open at her right elbow, the lunar table sheets she had copied that January from the Royal Astronomer's published ephemeris laid flat in their proper order at the green baize, the pen set down at the inkstand and the brass standish drawn to her hand. She had begun at the November page of the 1818 entries. She had returned to it because the Reverend Trigath had said on the Sunday previous, after the 10:30 service, that he had heard at the village of a coach expected from the Northallerton Road within the week, and the coach he had heard of was Sir Tarquin Frostley's, and Sir Tarquin had let it be known at the inn at Topcliffe that he came up with a paper. The Reverend had said no more than that. He had said it at the south porch, with his gold spectacles in his hand, and his plain black gown still upon him, and his Yorkshire civility had not chosen to read a paper at a hearsay. He had only said that, of the matter of papers, Augusta might wish to send the express to Mr. Hetherington at York. She had sent the express on the Monday by the boy from the lodge. Mr. Hetherington had answered by the Tuesday afternoon post. The hired chaise was at Skelbrook by 4:30, and he had come up to the South Library at 5, with the gold-rimmed spectacles in his inner pocket, the plain dark wool coat brushed of the road, the leather attaché case at his right hand, and the manner of a man who had read law at Lincoln's Inn for 40 years and had not been hurried at any one of them. He had taken his tea in the south parlour and his supper with Mrs. Tetlow, and he had spent the Tuesday evening at the writing table at Augusta's elbow, going through the Wentworth letter book and the testator's annual rent rolls of 1816 to 1819. The Reverend Trigath had come up at 9 on the Wednesday by the parish lane, with the calf-bound parish register of St. Cuthbert's for 1815 to 1819, and the ribbon set at the November page of 1818. He had laid it on the writing table at Mr. Hetherington's right elbow at 9:30, taken his place at the south sash window, with his back to the winter light and his face to the room, and not spoken since. He was a slight, grave man of 49, in a plain black gown and gold spectacles, present, attentive, asking no question, ready to answer any. Augusta had received Mr. Hetherington's letter at 9:20. She had read it twice through and laid it square at the south corner of the green baize. Mr. Hetherington had said only at the second reading, that the proper course was to receive Sir Tarquin civilly at the South Parlour, hear his paper in full, and answer at the South Library writing table afterwards, with the register and the lunar tables and the calf-bound book at her hand. It was a careful morning. Mrs. Tetlow had brought up the second pot of coffee at 10 and gone away again without speaking. Mr. Locke the steward had been about the lower meadow since first light and was not in the house. Mr. Skell the butler was at the south porch in his plain black tailcoat. The fire in the South Library grate had been kindled at 7 and had settled into the patient red heart it kept all the long February afternoons of the Hambleton fringe. At 3 minutes past 11, the dark coach with the Frostley arms on the door came up the Home Park Lane and turned at the south porch. Mr. Skell received them in his unhurried Yorkshire fashion at the porch step. He took the greatcoat from Sir Tarquin and the plain charcoal wool greatcoat from Mr. Pringle, set them on the porch table, asked the visitors to follow, and showed them into the south parlour at 4 minutes past the hour. He named them at the door of the parlour in the butlering manner of the house, Sir Tarquin Frostley of Frostley Court and Mr. Pringle of his council, and withdrew. Sir Tarquin Frostley, 58, stout 5 feet 10, gout-flushed, primrose silk waistcoat, oily fixed smile. He came in with the smile already arranged. He had the folded paper in his right hand under the cuff of his coat, a fawn kid glove in his left, and the heavy primrose-fronted manner of his name. He bowed at Augusta from 3 feet of distance and gave her the address of his Northallerton Court, with the syllables drawn long upon the second and the third. Miss Wentworth, I have come up the Hambleton Road in some incommodity to wait upon the heiress of the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth, my honoured kinsman, and I trust I find you in such health as the season of the year permits. Sir Tarquin. Augusta inclined her head from the parlour chair in the gentle method of the parsonage at Thirsk. Pray be seated. I have asked Mr. Skell to bring up coffee. And the gentleman at your side? Mr. Septimus Hetherington of York, sir. My executor by my late great-uncle's nomination. He has come up to consult upon a matter of the rent rolls. Mr. Hetherington, may I name Sir Tarquin Frostley? Mr. Hetherington bowed from his own 3 feet of distance. Sir Tarquin. Mr. Hetherington. Sir Tarquin returned the bow with the smile fixed at the same angle. And the gentleman at the sash? The Reverend Theophilus Tregarth, sir, curate of the parish. Reverend. The Reverend bowed once from the sash and said nothing further. Mr. Pringle, Sir Tarquin's barrister. Thin grey, charcoal wool. He had come in 2 paces behind Sir Tarquin with the thin charcoal-coated manner of a Gray's Inn junior at his second case. He was perhaps 33, with a grey eye, an in voice, and an air of being just below the position he had been placed in. Augusta gave him the second chair. Mr. Pringle, pray be seated. He sat. The coffee came up. Mr. Skell set the tray at the parlour table and went out. Augusta poured. Sir Tarquin took his cup with his thumb under the saucer, and the smile arranged at the same patient angle, and did not drink. Miss Wentworth. He set the cup down. I shall not impose upon the morning by such preface as a man of business might in another case allow himself. The matter I have come up to lay before you is grave, and it concerns the title to Skelbrook Hall and the home pasture as conveyed under the will of the 4th of October last. I shall hear the matter, Sir Tarquin. Mr. Pringle of my council will read the paper. Mr. Pringle took the folded sheet from Sir Tarquin's hand, opened it at the 3 printers' creases, set it square upon his knee, and read at the parlour step in the level low in voice of his office. He read it through without inflection and without lifting his eye from the page. The substance was that the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth, in the November of 1818, on the night of the full moon of that month, had received at the South Library at Skelbrook Hall the late Sir Goderic Frostley, 4th Baronet, Sir Tarquin's father, who had died in the March following, and had then and there, in the presence of one Mr. Hodgson, the late Sir Godric's coachman, and one Mrs. Catlow of Topcliffe, contracted a parole trust over the moiety of the Skelbrook estate, to be conveyed at his own death to the Frostley line. That the witnessed conversation had taken place at the South Library writing table at the hour of 9 in the evening, and that Sir Tarquin, as the late Sir Godric's only surviving issue, now claimed the half of Skelbrook Hall and of the home pasture and of the personal estate under the trust so contracted. The paper named the date of the interview, 3 pages in, as the Tuesday of the 24th of November, 1818. Mr. Pringle folded the paper back along the 3 creases and laid it at the parlour table beside his coffee. He did not raise his eye. "Such is the case, Miss Wentworth," said Sir Tarquin, "as my counsel sets it out. I have come up in the hope of a private settlement at this table, with the friendly intention of sparing both houses the publicity of a Chancery bill. I should hold myself well satisfied with the moiety to which my late father's interview entitles me, and with a writing under your hand at this parlour table to that effect, signed at the table this morning." Augusta laid her hand at the rim of her saucer. She did not change her face. She had heard the paper through without speaking, and she had not lifted the cup since the pouring of it. She said in the gentle voice of the parsonage at Thirsk that she had used to her late father at his autumnal decline, "Sir Tarquin, I have heard the matter as your counsel sets it out. I shall not answer at the parlour, since the papers requisite to the answer are at the South Library. If it is convenient to you, I shall ask you to come through to the South Library writing table at the 1:30, and I shall give my answer there." "Very well, Miss Wentworth." "Mr. Hetherington, will you go through?" "I shall, Miss Wentworth." "Reverend Tregath, will you bring the parish register through with you?" "I shall, Miss Wentworth." Sir Tarquin set his cup at the parlour table, with the smile arranged at the same angle, and the gout flush at the cheek a shade higher than it had been at the porch. He did not look at Mr. Pringle. Mr. Pringle looked at the carpet. The 4 of them went through to the South Library at 11:20, with Mr. Skell behind them carrying the coffee on the silver tray, and the Reverend Tregath bringing the parish register at his hand. The South Library was a long room of the 1738 build. 3 stone-mullioned sash windows ran along the south wall onto the home pasture. The honey-coloured oak writing table stood at the centre, with the green baize stretched square upon it. Augusta had set out her papers before 9, the calf-bound book at the right hand, the lunar table sheets at the left, the testator's letter book of 1818 set square at the lower edge, and the Royal Astronomer's published ephemeris for 1818 open at the November page at the top edge of the baize. The Reverend laid the parish register at Mr. Hetherington's right elbow, at the south corner of the table. Augusta took the writing table chair. Mr. Hetherington took the chair at her right hand, with the gold-rimmed spectacles already set upon his nose. Sir Tarquin took the chair across the table, and Mr. Pringle sat at his counsel's right elbow, with the folded paper laid square upon his knee. The Reverend Tregath stood at the south sash window, with his back to the winter light. Mr. Skell set the coffee at the south end of the table, bowed once at Augusta, and withdrew. The library clock at the north wall struck the 11:30. Sir Tarquin. Augusta laid her hand at the calf-bound book, and did not open it yet. "I shall set out my answer to the paper your counsel has read at the parlour. I shall ask you to bear with me at the pace of the matter. The paper is one of date, and date is a careful matter, and the answer is one of date also." "As you please, Miss Wentworth. Mr. Pringle, may I trouble you for the paper at my hand for the duration of this part of the answer? I shall return it before you go." Mr. Pringle looked at Sir Tarquin. Sir Tarquin inclined his head once. Mr. Pringle set the folded paper across the green baize. Mr. Hetherington took it, opened it at the 3 creases, and read in silence through to the named date at the 3rd page. He set his pencil finger at the date. The 24th of November, 1818, Miss Wentworth. Yes. Sir Tarquin, your counsel's paper names the interview at the Tuesday of the 24th. It does. And the paper has the interview at the night of the full moon of that month. It has. You confirm both points, Sir Tarquin. I confirm both points. Augusta opened the calf-bound book. She had kept it since the Christmas of 1813 at her late father's parsonage at Thirsk, and she had taken 3 such volumes through to the end since. The hand at the page was her own, a small upright italic at the upper left, the date at the right, the entry of the evening at the centre, the conditions of the night at the foot. She turned it at the November page of 1818. Sir Tarquin, I have here at the table my book of evening readings for the 24 months of the year, 1818 and the year following. The page is open at the November entries of the first of those years. Will you bear with me at the reading of the page? I shall. I have at the top of the page the printed lunar table I copied at York from the Royal Astronomer's published ephemeris, the Greenwich tables, as Mr. Pond keeps them, for the month of November of 1818. The page is set down at this table at my hand. First quarter, Sunday the 8th at 3 of the afternoon. Full, Sunday the 22nd at 23 minutes past 4 of the afternoon. Last quarter, Sunday the 29th at 8 of the morning. New, Monday the 7th of December at 11 of the evening. That is the table at the ephemeris. Sir Tarquin, the full was at the Sunday of the 22nd, at 23 minutes past 4 of the afternoon Greenwich. It was not at any Tuesday of that month. Sir Tarquin's smile did not yet alter, but the gout flush at the cheek was a shade higher than it had been at the parlour. He did not look at Mr. Pringle. Mr. Pringle had taken out his own pocket-book at the chair and was setting down the date at the inside cover in the level in-hand of his office. He did not look at Sir Tarquin either. The lunar table is the printed ephemeris, said Sir Tarquin. It is, Sir Tarquin. It is published yearly under the patent of the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty for the use of His Majesty's mariners, and is the table to which His Majesty's Nautical Almanac is bound. The volume I have copied from is at York Minster Library, and is open to consultation at any hour the librarian keeps. I have handled the 1818 part at the Minster Reading Room in the May, Miss Wentworth. Augusta turned the page of her calf-bound book to the right. Sir Tarquin, I have here at the page beneath the printed lunar table my own evening entry of the Sunday of the 22nd. I had been at the south parlour window at Thirsk that evening at 9:30 after the service. The page reads, and I shall read aloud. 22nd of November, 1818. Sunday. Cloud thin at the south. Wind southwesterly light. Moon at the full at 23 minutes past 4 of the afternoon. The eastern limb rising at 4 at the moor edge above Thirsk. Jupiter at 37 degrees of altitude at 9:30 of the evening at the south sash in the constellation of Pisces. The 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter at the 9:30. Io at the western elongation, 3 diameters from the disk. Europa at the eastern, 4 diameters. Ganymede at the eastern, 6 diameters. Callisto at the western, 8 diameters. The rate of transit of the 4 moons across the eastern face of the planet was as the Jovian system tables of Mr. Pond require for this date and hour. The reading was taken at the Dollond 3-inch achromatic refractor at the parsonage south window. Augusta Wentworth. She set her finger at the foot of the entry and looked up. Sir Tarquin. The full moon of November 1818 was at the Sunday of the 22nd, not the Tuesday of the 24th. I have at this table the Royal Astronomer's lunar ephemeris for the year, and the page is open at the November table. Your own paper says the 24th. The 24th was a Tuesday. The moon at the 24th was at gibbous, 3 days past the full. The matter you set out cannot have been on the night you set it out. The fire at the grate ticked once at a falling coal. The library clock at the north wall ticked at the 11:45. Sir Tarquin did not speak. Augusta turned the page over and laid her hand at the green baize. I have given the answer to the first point of date. I shall give the answer to the second point at the pace of the matter. Reverend Tregath, will you bring through the parish register? The Reverend came forward from the south sash at the walk of a parish curate of 49 years, and laid the register at the table at Mr. Hetherington's right hand. He set the ribbon at the November page of 1818 and stepped one pace back. Mr. Hetherington, will you read the relevant entries? Mr. Hetherington took the register in his hand, set the gold-rimmed spectacles forward upon his nose, and read, Parish Register of St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors, in the hand of the Reverend Theophilus Tregath, curate. November of 1818. The entries for the 9:30 evening service of the Sunday of the 22nd are at the page. 9:30 evening service, Sunday the 22nd. Officiating, the Reverend Theophilus Tregath, curate. Reading, the Epistle to the Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 1 to 14. Communicants, 34. Persons of note at the service. Mr. Eustace Wentworth of Skelbrook Hall, South Aisle, 3rd pew. Mrs. Margaret Tetlow, housekeeper. Mr. Hubert Locke, steward. Mr. John Skell, butler. Mr. Hetherington laid the register flat. Reverend Tregath. The entry is in your own hand. It is, Mr. Hetherington. And you officiated at the 9:30 evening service of that Sunday at the south aisle of St. Cuthbert's? I did, Mr. Hetherington. And Mr. Eustace Wentworth was at the 3rd pew of the south aisle at that service. He was. He took the 9:30 evening service at the 3rd pew of the south aisle every Sunday from his return from Madras in 1815 to the December of 1819, when he was no longer able to walk to the south porch. The entry is in my own hand, was set down at the parish desk at the close of the service, and is to be found at the Bishop of York's visitation copy of the register at York Minster. The matter is plain to the Reverend's hand. It is, Mr. Hetherington. Mr. Hetherington set the parish register at the green baize, and turned his face to Sir Tarquin. Sir Tarquin. The case set out at the paper your counsel has read at the parlour is that the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth, on the night of the full moon of November 1818, received at the South Library the late Sir Goderic Frostley at the hour of 9 of the evening, and contracted a parole trust over the moiety of the estate. The Royal Astronomer's published lunar ephemeris places the full at 23 minutes past 4 of the afternoon Greenwich of Sunday the 22nd. The Reverend Tregath's own register places Mr. Eustace Wentworth at the 3rd pew of the south aisle of St. Cuthbert's at the 9:30 evening service of that same Sunday. That is, at the very hour the late Sir Goderic is said to have been with him at the South Library writing table. The two cannot both be true. Mr. Wentworth was either at the south aisle at 9:30, or at the South Library writing table at the same hour. He cannot have been at both. The register places him at the south aisle. The paper places him at the South Library. The paper is at variance with the register. Mr. Hetherington took off the gold-rimmed spectacles, polished them with the plain cambric handkerchief from his inner pocket, and set them back upon his nose. He did not raise his voice. Sir Tarquin, the paper is at variance not only with the register but with the ephemeris. The date your counsel's paper names, the Tuesday of the 24th, was not the night of the full. The night the full fell, the Sunday of the 22nd, Mr. Wentworth was at the 9:30 evening service of his parish. The paper as set out cannot be sustained at a court of equity. Sir Tarquin had not moved his hand from the green baize. The gout flush at the cheek had risen to the upper line of the primrose silk waistcoat. He did not look at Mr. Pringle. He looked for one long moment at Augusta at the writing-table chair, and at the calf-bound book at her elbow, and at the printed lunar table set square at the upper edge of the green baize, and at the parish register at Mr. Hetherington's right hand. "The paper," he said, "may have been misdated at my counsel's clerk." "The paper, Sir Tarquin, is at variance not only at the date, but at the witnessed presence. Mr. Wentworth was at the south aisle at the 9:30 of the Sunday of the 22nd. Whether your counsel's clerk has set the date down at the Tuesday or at the Sunday, Mr. Wentworth was not at the South Library writing table at the 9:30 of either. I shall ask for the paper back." Mr. Pringle had not lifted his eye from the green baize. "Sir Tarquin," said Mr. Hetherington, with the warm, careful Yorkshire civility of his office, "I regret that I am unable to return the paper. It has been read at the South Library at the 11:30 of this morning in the presence of Miss Wentworth as the heiress at law, of myself as her executor, and of the Reverend Theophilus Trigath, curate of the parish at which the matter is alleged to have taken place. It is a written assertion at law against my client's title. I shall lodge it at the chambers at Stonegate at York at the close of the day, and I shall hold it there at the disposition of the court, should any further proceeding follow." "You will lodge the paper at York?" "I shall, Sir Tarquin." "Mr. Pringle." Mr. Pringle raised his eye for the first time since the parlour. He looked at Sir Tarquin, and then at Mr. Hetherington, and then at Augusta. He set his pocket-book at the green baize, and folded his hands at the table edge. He spoke at the level, low-in voice of his office. "Sir Tarquin, the paper is properly to be lodged. The case is drawn at my chambers at Lincoln's Inn, was drawn upon your father's late instruction, set down at his hand in the January of 1819, at his last illness. I had not seen the register. I had not been at the Minster Library at the tables. I had taken the date at the instruction, and I had drawn the paper at the instruction. I am unable at the register and at the tables to maintain it at law. I cannot advise you to proceed at Chancery. You cannot advise me to proceed at Chancery. I cannot, Sir Tarquin. I shall withdraw from the brief at the close of the morning. Mr. Pringle. Sir Tarquin. I shall withdraw." Sir Tarquin set his hand at the green baize and laid the other at the rim of his cup at the south end of the table. He did not drink. He looked at Augusta at the writing-table chair. The smile was no longer at the angle it had been at the porch. The primrose front of the waistcoat rose and fell at the rapid breathing of a man whose case has been settled at the table inside the hour, and who knows it. "Miss Wentworth." "Sir Tarquin." "I shall not press the matter further at this table." "You shall not, Sir Tarquin." "I have the honour to wish you a safe return at the season." "I have the honour to wish you a safe return at the home road, Sir Tarquin." He stood up at the table. He did not bow at the angle he had bowed at the porch. He turned at the South Library door and went out. And Mr. Pringle stood up at his counsel's chair, gathered his pocket-book at the green baize, and laid the folded paper at Mr. Hetherington's right hand at the parish register. Mr. Hetherington took the paper and set it at the leather attaché case at his elbow. Mr. Pringle bowed at the writing-table. "Miss Wentworth, I beg you to accept my good offices at any future matter at which they may be of use to you. I shall send you my card by the York post at the close of the week." "Mr. Pringle, I am much obliged to you." He went out by the South Library door at 4 minutes before noon. The dark coach with the frostly arms went down the Home Park Lane at 12:20. The Reverend Trigath came forward from the sash, set his gold spectacles at the bridge of his nose, and looked at Augusta. "Miss Wentworth." "Reverend." "The matter is settled." "It is, Reverend. I shall return at the parsonage and read the 1:30 service. I shall come up at the south porch at the 3:30, with the bishop's visitation extract for 1819 at your hand, if it shall be convenient. At the 3:30, Reverend. I am much obliged. He gathered the register, bowed once, and went out. Mr. Hetherington set the spectacles at the green baize and folded his hands at the table edge. He looked across at Augusta. Miss Wentworth, you have settled the matter in less than the hour. The lunar tables have settled it. Mr. Hetherington, the case will not be brought at Chancery. Sir Tarquin will not bring it. Mr. Pringle has withdrawn from the brief. The folded paper is at the leather case at my elbow, and will be lodged at Stonegate at the close of the day. I shall write the file note this evening and send the copy up at the Thursday post. I am much obliged to you, Mr. Hetherington. I am obliged to your calf-bound book, Miss Wentworth. I have not, in 40 years at the bar at York, settled a parole trust claim at the lunar tables of the Royal Astronomer. It is the particular method of the parsonage you were bred at, and the manner of answer your late father, I have heard, would have approved. Mr. Hetherington, Miss Wentworth, the matter is settled. I shall take my tea at the housekeeper's table at the 1:30 and return at York at the 4 o'clock chaise. I shall write to you on the Friday. Mr. Hetherington, I am much obliged. He stood up, gathered the leather attaché case, bowed once, and went out. Augusta sat one long, careful moment at the writing-table chair. The fire at the grate ticked at the second falling coal. The library clock at the north wall struck the noon. Outside the south sash windows, the home pasture lay white at the higher ground and brown at the lower, and the Skelbrook beck ran dark through the south meadow, and the pale winter light laid at the green baize and the calf-bound book and the printed lunar table. She closed the book at the November page of 1818. She set the lunar table sheets at the lower drawer of the writing table. She laid the testator's letter book of 1818 at the south shelf. She put the printed Royal Astronomer's ephemeris in its blue paper wrapper at the green baize, tied the ribbon at the cover, and laid the wrapper at the south corner of the writing table beside her late father's Dolland eyepiece cleaning cloth in the linen pouch. She did not weep. She did not call for Mrs. Tetlow. She set her hand at the closed book and stood one careful moment at the writing-table chair and at the small honey-stone hall above the home pasture of 174 acres at the south slope of the Hambleton fringe and at the patient red heart of the morning fire. She rang for Mr. Skell at the brass bell-pull at the south wall, and Mr. Skell came at the south library door, and Augusta asked for fresh coffee, and Mr. Skell bowed and went out at the butlering manner of the house, and the matter was settled. On the Saturday morning of the 5th of February, she was at the South Library writing table at 9:30. The calf-bound book was open at the page set for the 5th of February of 1820. She had taken the page the night before at the south sash window after the evening service, and read it once through at the morning candle, to set down her clean, fair copy. She wrote the entry in the small, upright italic of her father's parsonage at Thirsk, 5th of February, 1820, Saturday. Skelbrook Hall, South Library writing table. Clear, cold, pale blue North Riding morning. Wind north-easterly light. The matter of Sir Tarquin Frostley's folded paper, laid before me at the South Parlour at 11 of the morning of Wednesday last, was settled at the South Library writing table at the 11:30 by reference to the Royal Astronomer's published lunar ephemeris for 1818 and the parish register of St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors in the Reverend Theophilus Tregarth's own hand. The full of November 1818 fell at the Sunday of the 22nd at 4:23, Greenwich. Mr. Wentworth was at the third pew of the south aisle at the 9:30 evening service of that Sunday. The case at the paper cannot be sustained at law. The folded paper is lodged at Stonegate. Mr. Pringle of Counsel has withdrawn from the brief and has offered his good offices at any future matter. The matter is settled. She set her pen at the inkstand. She read the entry through once for the fair copy. She signed at the foot in her small, upright italic, Augusta Wentworth, Skelbrook Hall, and dated the entry at the right margin. She laid the new note at the page in the calf-bound book at the writing table, set the book square at the green baize, and went to her tea. February at Skelbrook Hall composed itself into the rhythm the Honeystone House of 1738 had kept these 82 years and would keep for many more. Mr. Skell setting the south parlour fire at 7:30, Mrs. Tetlow bringing up the morning tray at 8, Mr. Locke coming up at 9 with the home farm tally on a single sheet of Skelbrook foolscap, Augusta reading at the South Library, writing table from 10:15, walking the home pasture at noon when the moor edge weather was clear, dining at 3:30, reading at the South Library again until the moor dusk closed at 6, taking tea at 7, observing at the south porch from 7 until 9 on the cloudless evenings, and going up to the first-floor bedchamber at 10. One sentence, and the sentence was Skelbrook from Monday the 7th of February forward. On Tuesday the 8th of February, Mrs. Tetlow brought up to the South Library at 10:20 her niece Miss Tabitha Fawcett, that Augusta might have a reading companion at the South Library evenings of the spring. Miss Tabitha Fawcett was 25, dark-eyed, soft-mouthed, in plain dove-grey wool over white linen collar. Augusta read her the first chapter of Maria Edgeworth's Harry and Lucy in her careful voice over the half-hour of the morning, and Miss Fawcett read the second in a careful country voice over the half-hour following, and at the close of the second chapter, Augusta, in level composure, said that the arrangement was settled at the South Library, reading evenings from the Monday following forward. Miss Fawcett came up from the lodge cottage 3 days a week at 6:20, and read with Augusta at the writing table until the moor dusk closed at 8:30, and the reading evenings kept their rhythm through February and March, and into April. On Wednesday the 9th of February, Reverend Trigath walked up the Skelbrook Lane to the south porch at 2:20 with 6 village girls of the parish school in a row of 6, each in clean print cotton with a clean white linen collar, each in a plain dark wool cap against the moor edge chill. The 6 village girls were Anne Skell, Hester Beresford, Patience Moore, Damaris Croft, Lavinia Strickland, and Bryony Howe, Mr. Skell's grandniece up from the village, the Skelbrook Smith's eldest, the Chalk-Style Farm's middle daughter, the Croft Cottage's only girl, the lodgekeeper Strickland's eldest, and the Moor Edge farmer, Howe's quiet, thin-shouldered child of 12 years. They took 6 ladder-back chairs at the half-circle Mrs. Tetlow had set at the south window, and Augusta read them the first 2 chapters of Harry and Lucy in her careful voice, and Reverend Trigath read them the first 100 lines of Cowper's Yardley Oak in his mild parish curate voice. Mrs. Tetlow sent up oatcakes and warm milk at 4 o'clock. The reading class was composed by the close of the second Wednesday at 4:30, and it kept its Wednesday rhythm through the cool, pale Lent at Skelbrook. That same evening, Wednesday the 9th of February, Augusta laid open at the South Library writing table the small Dollond pocket spyglass that had been her late great-uncle's bequest to Mr. Locke at the will of October 1819, and that Mr. Locke had lent back to her at her late great-uncle's settled wish that the pocket spyglass should remain at the South Library for the considered observation it had given the late Mr. Wentworth these 4 years past. The pocket spyglass was a small brass 3-inch instrument in a worn leather case, marked Dollond, London, 1798 at the eyepiece, and it took the pale evening at the south porch with the gentle, considered focus of an instrument that had been carefully kept these 21 years. Augusta laid the case at the South Library writing table at 7:20 in the cool February dusk. Augusta resolved at the close of the second reading class to begin an observing rota with the 6 village girls at the south porch on cloudless evenings. that the village girls might learn the lunar phases of the parish heavens as Augusta had learned them at the South Parsonage window at Thirsk from her late father's Dolland at 15 years of age. She wrote out the rota in level italic on a single sheet of Skelbrook foolscap on the Thursday morning of the 10th at the South Library writing table. The 6 village girls were to come up the Skelbrook Lane at 20 to 7 on the cloudless evenings, 2 girls a night by turns, that the rota of 3 pairs might run the week. Mrs. Tetlow was to send up oatcakes and warm milk at the half-hour, and the pair of village girls were to observe the night at the south porch from 7 until 9, with the small Dolland pocket spyglass, and to sketch the lunar phase in their own homemade copybooks under Augusta's careful hand. The rota was settled at 20 to noon on Thursday the 10th of February. The first cloudless evening was Saturday the 12th of February. Anne Skell and Hester Beresford came up the Skelbrook Lane at 20 to 7 with their homemade copybooks in their hands. Mrs. Tetlow had cut 6 copybooks from Skelbrook foolscap and stitched them in the housekeeper's pantry on the Friday afternoon, and they stood at the south porch with Augusta from 7 until 9 in the cool, clear moor-edge sky. The waxing gibbous moon of the 12th of February stood at the northeast at 3 and 40 degrees of altitude, in her 4 and 80% illumination at the 8 and 40th hour from her first quarter, and Augusta showed Anne and Hester at the small Dolland pocket spyglass the careful moon at the considered focus of the 18-inch brass tube. Anne sketched the gibbous phase in her homemade copybook in a careful 8-year-old's pencil hand, and Hester sketched the same gibbous phase in a careful 9-year-old's hand, and Augusta marked the date and the illumination and the altitude at the foot of each copybook in level italic. At 9 o'clock, the 2 village girls walked back down the Skelbrook Lane to the village, and the first observing evening was composed at the south porch of Skelbrook Hall. The observing rota kept its Saturday and Tuesday and Friday rhythm through the cloudless evenings of February and March, and into April. Patience Moore and Damaris Croft noted the third quarter phase at the south porch on the cloudless Tuesday evening of the 15th of February. Lavinia Strickland and Bryony Howe noted the waning crescent at the south porch on the cloudless Friday evening of the 18th. The 6 village girls marked the new lunation at the south porch on the cloudless Monday evening of the 21st. The small Dolland pocket spyglass at a clean evening sky, with no moon at the south horizon, the village girls reading at the south horizon the first stars of the spring. And Augusta marked the new lunation at the foot of each copybook in level italic at 9 o'clock that evening. The waxing gibbous moon of the 12th of February was the first sketch in each of the 6 copybooks, and the 6 copybooks kept their entries through the 4 lunations of February and March and April. Mr. Locke walked Augusta the home pasture in mid-February. They went out at the south porch at 20 past 10 on the cool, pale blue Wednesday morning of the 16th. Mr. Locke in his plain dark woolen coat, and Augusta in plain black morning gabardine with the dark morning cap at the nape, and they walked the boundary of the home pasture in his weathered voice at the rule of walking a parish boundary that the moor-edge steward had kept these 40 years at Skelbrook. Mr. Locke named the upland fell, the 72 acres of moor-edge heather above the dry stone wall at the north, and the lower stone-walled meadow, the 84 acres of pasture below the wall to the beck, and the home park, the 18 acres of orchard and walled garden and Home Park Lane at the south face of the hall. 174 acres at the considered settled boundary of the home pasture, in the order the dry stone wall had kept since the William Wentworth settlement of 1738. Mr. Locke walked Augusta the 18th century dry stone wall at the upland fell, the 18th century elder coppice at the southeast corner of the lower meadow, the 18th century Home Park Lane at the south face of the hall, and the 18th century apple and pear orchard at the west of the home park. The walk closed at the south porch at noon, and Augusta took up her plain pen at the writing table at 1 and wrote the home pasture boundary in level italic at the small calf-bound estate book Mr. Locke had laid at her right hand. Augusta read at the South Library writing table through the pale February afternoons. The 412 volumes of the South Library were principally classical and theological, the Greek and Latin authors that her late great-uncle had brought back from Madras, the Cambridge divines of the 17th century, the 18th century English moralists, and Augusta read them at the level parsonage pace of a parsonage-bred reader of 30 years. She read the Iliad in the Pope translation through the second Lent fortnight, and the Task of Cowper through the third, and Mrs. Hannah More's Colebs through the close of February into the first week of March. Miss Tabitha Fawcett came up to the South Library at 6:20 on the Monday and Wednesday and Friday evenings, and read with Augusta at the writing table until the more dusk closed at 8:30, and the reading evenings kept their level reading rhythm. On Wednesday the 22nd of March, 1820, at 3:30 of the afternoon, in the cool, pale yellow moor-edge light at the South Library writing table, Mrs. Tetlow brought up from the long cupboard at the back of the South Library a worn calf madras correspondence box of 18th century make, marked at the brass plate at the lid. Eustace Wentworth Madras, 1786. She laid the box on the green baize at Augusta's right hand, and she said in her plain, steady voice that the box had been kept at her own hand these 4 years past at the late Mr. Wentworth's settled instruction of his return from Madras in 1815, that it was to be brought up to the next Wentworth heir at Skelbrook at the close of the first Lent of the heir's coming, and not before. Mrs. Tetlow went quietly back down the South Library steps to the housekeeper's pantry at the half-basement. Augusta untied the worn calf box at the writing table at 4:20 in the pale yellow March light, and the things in it came up in their order. The first was a packet of 18 letters tied at the centre with a narrow strip of plain dark Wentworth ribbon, all in the hand of the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth, all addressed to her late father, the Reverend Augustus Wentworth, at the parsonage of Thirsk. The letters were dated from the autumn of 1815. The first one in October, 1815, 2 months after the testator's return from Madras to Skelbrook. To the autumn of 1819. The last one in October T 1819 from Skelbrook to Thirsk that her late father had received at the close of October at the parsonage, and that Augusta had read at her father's writing desk at the Thirsk parsonage south window at the close of October of her father's 7th year at 63. 18 letters at the considered hand of her late great-uncle the testator. 1 letter for every quarter-day of the 4 years he had been at Skelbrook. The half-correspondence Augusta had not known he had kept. The second thing in the worn calf box was a small private journal, 3½ inches by 5, bound in worn dark calf at a single plain brass clasp at the fore-edge, marked at the front, pasted end paper in the level italic of the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth, a private journal of the Galilean moon. Observations of Eustace Wentworth at Skelbrook Hall, in the parish of Skelbrook in the Moors, in the North Riding of the County of York, the considered hobby of his retirement, begun this 5th of August, 1815, at the South Library window of Skelbrook Hall. Augusta took up the small journal in her careful hand and read it at the writing table at 4:25 in the pale yellow March light. The journal had been kept at the South Library window of Skelbrook Hall on every cloudless evening from the 5th of August, 1815 to the 9th of December, 1819. 2 days before her late great-uncle's death of the 11th of December at the long autumnal decline at 79 years of age. 4 years and 4 months and 4 days of the careful observation of the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter, Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, at the South Library window in the considered Cambridge quality hand of an old East India Company merchant who had taken up the considered hobby at the close of his return from Madras to the North Riding. The August 1815 page recorded the first observation, the 4 Galilean moons at the South Library window at 9:30 in the warm, pale blue August dusk, Io at the western elongation, Europa at the eastern, Ganymede at the western, and Callisto at the eastern, the eyepiece magnification 52, the air steady and the seeing good at the cool, clear, moor-edge night of the South Library window. The November 1818 page recorded the full moon of the 22nd of November at the South Library window at 9:30 in the cool, clear sky, the 4 Galilean moons at the eastern elongation behind the bright lunar disk, the eyepiece magnification 100 at the close of the parish service at Reverend Tregath's parsonage, the same November 22nd, 1818 page on which the Wentworth lunar tables had stood at the South Library writing table at the morning of Wednesday the 2nd of February at Sir Tarquin Frostley's collapsed parole trust claim. The September 1819 page recorded the autumnal equinox heavens at the South Library window, the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter at first elongation, the eyepiece magnification 84. The November 1819 page recorded the 4 Galilean moons at the close of November in the cool, pale yellow autumn. The 9th of December 1819 page recorded the last observation, the 4 Galilean moons at the South Library window at 9:20 in the cool, clear December dusk, Io at the western elongation, Europa at the eastern, Ganymede at the western, Callisto at the eastern. The considered moons at the considered hand at the close of a 4-year private journal of the Galilean moon observations of the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth at Skelbrook Hall. 2 days later, her late great-uncle was dead at the long autumnal decline at 79. Augusta closed the journal at the 9th of December 1819 last entry and set it gentle at the green baize. She did not weep. She set her hand careful on the journal's worn calf cover and stood 10 silent minutes at the South Library writing table in the cool, pale yellow March light. Mrs. Tetlow at the brick hob below in the half-basement kitchen did not speak. The 10 silent minutes closed at 4:10 in the cool, pale yellow March afternoon, and Augusta took up her plain pen at the inkstand of dark moor slate and wrote at the close of her own calf-bound Galilean Moons notebook at the foot of the page for Wednesday the 22nd of March 1820, the level italic record. The Galilean Moon Journal of the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth at Skelbrook. Begun August 5, 1815, closed 9 December 1819, opened by his great-niece Miss Augusta Wentworth at the South Library writing table this day. The record is to be continued at the same South Library window at the careful pace of her late great-uncle's considered hand. Augusta read through the 18 letters at the South Library, evenings of the 23rd to the 31st of March, at the writing table in the cool, pale yellow March light, Miss Tabitha Fawcett at the second sash window with her sewing in the level silence of the South Library evenings. The 18 letters were from her late great-uncle at Skelbrook to her late father at Thirsk, and they were the half of a correspondence Augusta had known these years past, only at the other end. Her late father's annual quarter-day letters from the South Parsonage at Thirsk to the Skelbrook South Library, which she had copied to her father's plain pen at the South Parsonage window from 1815 to 1819. The careful quarter-day letters that had carried to her late great-uncle the news of his great-niece's astronomical hobby at the Thirsk Parsonage south window. The 18 Skelbrook letters were her late great-uncle's careful replies, careful comments on her father's parish at Thirsk, careful observations on the Skelbrook harvest and the home pasture and the village school, careful inquiries after her late father's health at the long autumnal decline of 1815 and 1816, and at the centre of each letter, in the level hand, a careful quarter-day note on the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter at the South Library window. The half-correspondence with her late father at Thirsk was now whole. Augusta read each letter at the writing table at the considered pace, copied the centre quarter-day moons note to her own calf-bound Galilean moons notebook at the foot of each quarter-day page of the 4 years from 1815 to 1819, and folded each letter at the end of its evening reading and laid it back in the worn calf Madras correspondence box. The 31st of March closed at 9:30 of the cool, pale yellow March evening at the South Library writing table. Lady Day Quarter Day fell on Saturday, the 25th of March, 1820, in cool, pale blue, North Riding weather. Mr. Locke brought up the quarter-day account at 10:30 on the Saturday morning, on a single sheet of Skelbrook foolscap in his weathered hand, the home farm tally at Lady Day, the village rents at Lady Day, the customary annual rent of the steward's cottage, the Skelbrook outgoing at Lady Day, the net balance at Lady Day, the customary annual rent of the steward's cottage at Mr. Locke's plain dark woolen item, stood at the foot of the village rents column, and Mr. Locke read it aloud once in his weathered voice. Augusta read the account at the South Library writing table at 20 to 11 in the cool, pale blue Lady Day morning light, took up her late father's steel-nibbed pen at the inkstand of Moorslate, and signed the account in level careful italic at the foot. Augusta Wentworth, Skelbrook Hall, Lady Day, 25th March, 1820. The signature was firm, and the italic was level, and the Skelbrook quarter day was composed at 20 to 11 on Saturday, the 25th of March. Mr. Locke folded the account on its half-sheet and took it back down the South Library steps to the steward's cottage at the home pasture at the customary rent. In the middle of April, on the cool, pale blue Tuesday morning of the 11th, Mrs. Tetlow brought up from the South Library long cupboard a worn linen jewel case of late 18th century make, tied at the centre with a narrow strip of plain dark Wentworth ribbon, and laid it on the dressing table in Augusta's first-floor bedchamber at the south face of the hall. She said in her plain, steady voice that the jewel case held the Wentworth family pearls, a single moderate row of 32 pearls of York, 1788, brought back from York at the close of the wedding summer of 1788 by the late Mr. Bartholomew Wentworth at the gift to his wife, Mrs. Caroline Wentworth, née Beresford, of their first year of marriage, marked at the silver clasp, York 1788, in the careful engraving of the York jeweller of the period, and that the pearls were the Wentworth wear of the Wentworth women at the parish feasts, and the Easter Sunday, and the Whit Sunday, and the harvest feast at the close of August, and that they were Augusta's at the Easter Sunday following. Augusta took up the worn linen jewel case in her careful hand, and read at the silver clasp the marking York, 1788, in the cool, pale blue April morning light. She laid the case quietly on the dressing table and thanked Mrs. Tetlow in her careful voice. Mrs. Tetlow went quietly back down the first-floor steps. On the Wednesday following, Wednesday the 12th of April, at the 3 o'clock parish school reading at the South Library, the 6 village girls of the Skelbrook Parish School came up the Skelbrook Lane at 2:20, with Reverend Trigath 3 paces behind in his plain black gown, each in clean print cotton with a clean white linen collar, and at 3 o'clock at the South Library writing table, Bryony Howe, the gravest of the 6, at 12 years of Moor-Edge composure, laid on the writing table a Moor-Edge wildflower album of 24 pages of pressed flowers, gathered at their Sunday walks from the first Sunday of March to the second Sunday of April. 1 Moor-Edge wildflower to a page, titled in the careful italic of Damaris Croft at the parish school writing desk, Snowdrop, Lenten Rose, Early Primrose, Wood Anemone, Lesser Celandine, Dog Violet, Ground Ivy, Wood Sorrel, Stitchwort, Bittercress, Chickweed, Speedwell, White Dead Nettle, Field Forget-Me-Not, Barren Strawberry, Shepherd's Purse, early dandelion, coltsfoot, more heath bedstraw leaf, more edge tormental leaf, more cowberry leaf, Skelbrook bilberry leaf, more woodsage leaf, and Skelbrook beckwater cress leaf. The cover bore, in the careful italic of Damaris Croft, presented to Miss Augusta Wentworth of Skelbrook Hall, with the thanks of the 6 village girls of the Skelbrook Parish School, on Wednesday the 12th of April, in the year of our Lord, 1820. Augusta took the album in her careful hand and accepted it in settled gratitude, and thanked the 6 girls each in turn. Anne Skell, Hester Beresford, Patience Moore, Damaris Croft, Lavinia Strickland, Bryony Howe, and laid the album on the writing table at 3:20 in the pale yellow April afternoon. Then at 3:25 she went up the South Library steps to the first-floor bedchamber and came back down with 6 cloth-bound copies of Aesop's Fables in the York edition of 1814 from the South Library shelf, and she gave each girl one in turn, to Anne Skell first, to Hester Beresford, to Patience Moore, to Damaris Croft, to Lavinia Strickland, and to Bryony Howe last. The 6 girls each took the cloth-bound Aesop in her hands and curtsied in turn, and Reverend Tregarth walked them back down the Skelbrook Lane at 4:30 in his plain black gown. In late April, so on the cool, pale blue Saturday morning of the 15th, Augusta laid aside the unrelieved black mourning gabardine she had worn these 4 months since her late great-uncle the testator had died at Skelbrook in the December of 1819. Mrs. Tetlow brought up at 9:30 the half mourning that the York dressmaker had made up over the Lent fortnight, following Miss Fawcett's first reading evening, fresh cream and grey, sprigged muslin for the Easter Sunday morning service at St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors, soft cream wool with a grey ribbon for Sunday afternoons, plain cream linen with a grey collar for Sunday mornings, and laid them one by one on the bedchamber settle in the cool, pale blue April morning light. Augusta stood at the cheval glass at 9:15 in the fresh cream and grey, sprigged muslin, and read the image in the glass at the arm's length of a Skelbrook gentlewoman of 30 years at the close of the first quarter of mourning. The image in the glass was Miss Augusta Wentworth of Skelbrook Hall. Easter Sunday fell on the 23rd of April, 1820, in cool, clear, pale yellow weather, of the kind that the moor edge takes at the close of a Skelbrook Lent. Augusta walked down the Skelbrook Lane to the village at 10:20 in her fresh, cream and grey, sprigged muslin half mourning, with the moderate row of Wentworth family pearls of York, 1788, at her throat, and a sprig of early Yorkshire primrose at the bodice that Mrs. Tetlow had cut from the walled south garden at 9:30, and Mrs. Tetlow 3 paces behind in her plum bombazine with her brass keys at her belt. The Easter morning service at St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors was at 11 by Reverend Theophilus Tregarth in his Easter white surplice over his plain black gown. He read the Easter Collect and the Easter Epistle from the 1st to the Corinthians at the 15th chapter, and the Easter Gospel from St. John at the 20th chapter. And the Skelbrook Village Choir sang the Easter anthem, Christ our Passover, at 11:20. And the Easter sermon at 11:30 was Reverend Tregarth's considered reading of the Easter Sunday at the 19th century, and the service closed at 12 o'clock. Augusta and Reverend Tregarth came out of the nave at 12:05 by the south porch of St. Cuthbert's into the cool, pale yellow Easter early afternoon. The Skelbrook village congregation walked one by one down the south path to the Lich Gate. Mrs. Tetlow stood 3 paces behind Augusta at the south porch, and at noon there stood at the south porch in the pale yellow Easter light an unfamiliar tall Yorkshire country gentleman of 41 years, whom Augusta had not seen before. The 6th Duke of Helmsley was tall, lean 6'2", with dark chestnut hair lately silvering at the temples. calm grey-blue eyes the colour of the North Riding sky at first frost, weathered fair Cambridge-trained complexion, plain honey-fawn morning coat over a plain cream waistcoat, the silver ducal signet on his right hand. He inclined deeply at Augusta and at Reverend Tregarth upon the flagstones in the pale yellow Easter light. Reverend Tregarth introduced him in his mild parish gravity. Miss Wentworth, His Grace Crispin Aubrey Wakefield, 6th Duke of Helmsley Castle, 12 miles northeast on the higher ground above Rievaulx. Lord Helmsley is the lay patron of the Skelbrook living and the standing improver of the parish school these 4 years past. The Duke observed in a calm, composed voice upon the flagstones that he had known the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth of Skelbrook since the autumn of 1815 as the considered astronomical observer of Skelbrook parish, 4 years of Skelbrook parish feast meetings and Helmsley Castle Whitsun calls and St. Cuthbert's parish school inspections, and that he had been moved at the December bereavement of the late Mr. Wentworth at the long autumnal decline of the close of 1819. He observed in the same calm voice that he had at the September 1819 parish school inspection of St. Cuthbert's Skelbrook in his lay patron capacity seen at Mr. Trigath's hand, the late Mr. Wentworth's small Galilean moon journal at the south sash window of the parish schoolhouse, and that he had remarked at the time on the careful Cambridge-quality observation of the considered hand. He had not, in his 8 months at Helmsley Castle since the 5th Duke's death of October 1818, expected to see that hand continue at the south library window of Skelbrook Hall. Augusta in Level, Yorkshire, composure replied at the south porch flagstones, "Your Grace, I am gratified at your kindness in coming over. The Galilean moon record at Skelbrook I shall continue at my late great-uncle's settled wish." The reply was firm and composed at 22 past noon. The Duke acknowledged the reply with attentive gravity upon the flagstones, and observed in the same calm, composed voice that the considered continuation at the south library window of Skelbrook Hall was a settled satisfaction to him in his lay patron capacity at the Skelbrook living, and to his memory of the late Mr. Eustace Wentworth at the September 1819 inspection. Reverend Tregarth stood 3 paces beyond at the south porch in his Easter white surplice. Mrs. Tetlow stood 3 paces behind Augusta in her plum bombazine. Reverend Tregarth walked the Duke and Augusta down the south path to the Lich Gate at 1/4 past noon. The Duke took his leave at 20 past noon at the Lich Gate, inclined deeply at Augusta and at Reverend Tregarth, and walked to his Helmsley Castle carriage at 3 paces beyond the Lich Gate, where his Helmsley Castle groom stood at the Chestnut Bay's bridle. He took the Skelbrook Lane northward to the higher ground above Rievaulx in the pale yellow Easter afternoon at 23 past noon, and the carriage went up the lane at the Easter light and was gone out of sight at the first bend of the moor edge. Augusta walked back along the Skelbrook Lane to the hall with Mrs. Tetlow 3 paces behind in the pale yellow Easter Sunday afternoon. At the south door of Skelbrook Hall, at 12:30, she paused at the Honeystone threshold and looked south across the moor edge at the considered moor edge light, sensible of an alteration she would not yet attempt to name at the south door of the first Easter Sunday at Skelbrook Hall. Mrs. Tetlow stood 3 paces behind her in the pale yellow Easter light. The cool, clear, pale yellow Easter Sunday afternoon closed at the south porch of St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors and at the south door of Skelbrook Hall in level equanimity. Saturday, the 6th of May, 1820, came in a soft west wind off the Hambleton fringe, with a thin, pale blue cloud above the southern horizon at noon, and the larks rising at the lower meadow of the Skelbrook Beck. Miss Augusta Wentworth had been at the South Library writing table at 2:30 of the afternoon, with her Galilean moon notebook open at the page for Wednesday the 3rd of May, where she had set down in level italic the cloudless evening's record of Jupiter at the south horizon at 20 minutes past 9. Miss Tabitha Fawcett sat at the second sash with her sewing frame at her knee. Mrs. Margaret Tetlow had come up from the south porch at 5 minutes before 3, with the announcement that the carriage from Helmsley Castle had been seen at the lower gate, and that His Grace, the 6th Duke of Helmsley, was at the south porch with Lady Cassandra Wakefield, Lady Adelaide Heatherwood, and Sir Rowland Heatherwood, and Her Grace the Dowager Duchess of Helmsley. Augusta closed the Galilean moon notebook at the green baize. She tucked the small Dollond eyepiece cleaning cloth at the linen pouch at her belt. She rose from the south library writing table and went down to the south porch. The 6th Duke of Helmsley was tall, lean 6'2", with dark chestnut hair lately silvering at the temples, calm grey-blue eyes the colour of the North Riding sky at first frost, weathered fair Cambridge-trained complexion, a plain honey-fawn morning coat over a cream waistcoat, the silver ducal signet on his right hand. He inclined deeply at Augusta on the south porch step. Lady Cassandra Wakefield, 5, stood at his right hand. Soft auburn hair, plaited with grey ribbons, calm grey-blue eyes her father's, peach and cream sprigged muslin. Lady Adelaide Heatherwood, 8 and 30, the Duke's married elder sister, stood at his left. Dark chestnut chignon, level grey eyes, dove-grey carriage pelisse. Sir Rowland Heatherwood, 5 and 40, at Adelaide's side. Tall light brown hair, weathered hazel eyes, plain dark bottle coat. The Dowager Duchess of Helmsley, 7 and 60, stood at the porch. Soft silver hair, kind grey-blue eyes, plum silk dress with cream lace at the cuff. Mrs. Tetlow received the company at the South Library at 3. Mr. Skell the butler set the silver salver at the side table. The Dowager Duchess and Lady Cassandra and Lady Adelaide and Sir Rowland were taken to the South Library settee at the east wall. The Duke stood at the south sash near Augusta. Tea was set at 3:30 at the long oak writing table by Mary the upper maid. The Dowager Duchess spoke first in her settled voice of the cool south window light. She had been long acquainted, she said, with the late Reverend Augustus Wentworth's quarter-day letters at the Helmsley reading hour through her late husband, the 5th Duke, who had, at his death in October 1818, left a green leather Cambridge commonplace book filled with parsonage correspondence collected since 1796. She inquired after Augusta's reading school and the parish school girls at the south porch. Augusta answered in level composure of Anne Skell and Hester Beresford and the cloudless evening rota, of the lunar phases drawn at the village girls' home-made copybooks, of Mr. Locke at the home pasture and the 22 cattle and the 14 North Riding Cheviot sheep wintered without loss. Lady Adelaide spoke of her own house at Heatherwood Park near Pickering, where she had lately set her elder daughter, Miss Emily Heatherwood of 9, to a reading hour after the Thirsk pattern. Sir Rowland inquired after the Skelbrook home pasture. Mr. Locke's quarter-day audit at Lady Day had gone forward at the steward's cottage at 9:30 on the 25th of March, Augusta said, and the 3 Cleveland Bay carriage horses had been seen sound at the upper fold by the farrier from Stokesley on the 2nd of April. It was at tea, at the long oak writing table at 3:20, that the Duke turned at his cup and spoke to Augusta in his level, Cambridge-trained voice. He had come, he said, with a question he had long considered. The walled south terrace at Helmsley Castle, he said, had been laid out in 1786 by the 4th Duke as an observing station, with the brick pillar and the iron mounting and the southern horizon, clear at Jupiter's winter elevation. It had been used through the 5th Duke's lifetime. The 5th Duke had read the Philosophical Transactions at the South Terrace through his retired years from 1810 to 1818. But at the 5th Duke's death, The south terrace had fallen to neglect these 8 months. He himself had not, at his own patience, laid hand to it. He wished, he said, to ask Miss Wentworth whether she might consent to lay it out afresh. Augusta acquiesced in level Yorkshire composure. She would, she said, be pleased to advise at the pace the terrace's 8-month neglect deserved. Lady Cassandra Wakefield, who had been sitting at the Dowager Duchess's knee with her hands at her cream muslin lap, asked at her own 5-year-old gravity whether she might be permitted to look through the Dolland eyepiece. Augusta inclined at the child. She might, Augusta said, at the cloudless evening of next Tuesday at the south library window. Lady Cassandra received the answer with the satisfaction of one whose question had been answered as asked. The Helmsley Company departed at 4:20. The Dowager Duchess at the south porch step set her hand on Augusta's. She had heard, she said, the asking. Augusta inclined. Through May and the early weeks of June, the Duke called at Skelbrook Hall on Tuesdays at the South Library reading hour at 2:30. Miss Tabitha Fawcett sat at the second sash with her sewing frame, the Yorkshire chaperonage held without remark. They read at the long oak writing table Augusta's own Galilean moon notebook, page 740 for the Wednesday 21st March, 1818 Io Europa Shadow Transit, page 250 for the Tuesday 2nd of June 1818, Ganymede immersion at 20 minutes past 10. And the Duke read aloud at his Cambridge-trained voice from the Herschel description of a 40-foot reflecting telescope of 1795, which he had read at Trinity in his senior Wrangler year, and which he had marked at the margin in pencil in his level italic at 5 places between page 430 and page 70. He set the Herschel at the green baize at his right hand and Augusta's notebook at her right elbow, and the reading hour went forward at the pace of one to whom astronomical observation had been the long habit of mind. Mrs. Tetlow brought up the cool tea at 4:30. The Tuesday call closed at 5 at the south porch in the soft late spring light. On Wednesdays through May and June, the Duke rode over from Helmsley Castle at 2:30, the 12-mile northeast ride taken at an even pace on his Cleveland Bay riding mare. They walked the Skelbrook home pasture at 3 and the lower meadow of the Skelbrook beck at 4. Mr. Locke at the steward's cottage saluted the Duke at the home pasture gate with the civility of a steward at his settled keep. Mrs. Tetlow, at the south porch, set out the cold tea at 5:30. They spoke at the home pasture of the 24 acres laid down to oats at Lady Day under Mr. Locke's hand, of the lambs of the North Riding Cheviots at the upper fold, of the 4 sheepdogs at the steward's cottage. They spoke at the lower meadow of the Skelbrook beck, running clear over the flat shale at the south bend, of the dark olive trout taken there by the late Mr. Wentworth in the August of 1817, of the small grey heron that came up each evening at 6:20 at the alder root at the south curve. On the Wednesday of the 7th of June, at the southeast corner of the home pasture at the dry stone wall, the Duke knelt at a tussock of moor heather that had come up between the stones. He gathered a sprig at the measured pace of one whose hands have been long trained at observation. He rose. He gave the sprig to Augusta in level Yorkshire silence. Augusta took the sprig at her hand. She placed it at the linen pouch at her belt, where the Dolland eyepiece cleaning cloth was kept. She inclined at the Duke. They walked on at the lower meadow of the Skelbrook beck. Neither spoke for the next 10 minutes. At the south alder root, the small grey heron rose at 6:20 and went off east toward the lower fold. On the Wednesday of the 28th of June, at the South Library at 4:30, the Duke set his cup at the green baize. He had a further question, he said. Through the month of July, on the Saturdays, might he be at home to call at the south parlour at Skelbrook Hall, at Miss Fawcett's chaperonage, between the hours of 3 and 5. Augusta acquiesced in level Yorkshire gravity. The Saturday calls at the South Parlour began at the 2nd day of July. Miss Fawcett sat at the south sash with her sewing frame. Mrs. Tetlow brought the tea tray at 3:30. The Duke took the South Parlour chair near the cool fireplace, Augusta the armchair opposite. They read the Quarterly Review of April 1820 at the Duke's hand. They spoke of the Skelbrook quarter-day audit at Mr. Locke's keeping. They spoke at the cloudless Saturday evening's plan for Jupiter at the south horizon. The Duke departed at 5 minutes before 5 each Saturday at the south porch. There were 5 such Saturdays: the 2nd, the 9th, the 16th, the 23rd, the 30th of July. At the third of them, Augusta read aloud to the Duke from her notebook the entry for Friday the 17th of December, 1819, 6 days after her great-uncle's death, when she had first set the Dolland refractor at the South Parlour window at Thirsk through the cool, dry frost of the Yorkshire winter, and observed the late Jovian satellites emerging from the planet's eastern shadow at 13 minutes past 10. The Duke listened in level grey-blue silence. He inclined at her at the close of the entry. He spoke of the Board of Longitude's discussions of 1814 at the lunar distance tables, and of his own correspondence with the late Mr. Maskelyne, the Astronomer Royal, in his last year of office at Greenwich. A tall, lean, grave gentleman of 77 at the Cambridge Observatory in the April of his death. Augusta heard him at her settled hazel-grey listening, her hands folded at her muslin lap, the eyepiece cleaning cloth at the linen pouch at her belt. At the 4th Saturday they spoke of the Skelbrook observing rota with the 6 village girls. Anne Skell and Hester Beresford had asked at the previous Tuesday evening whether they might draw the lunar phases at their own homemade copybooks at the August new moon week of the 7th through the 14th. Augusta had said they might. The Duke inquired after Patience Moore, 8, whose father had been a Skelbrook day labourer, and whose hand at the drawing pencil had been remarked at the parish school by Reverend Trigath in the April. Augusta said Patience Moore's hand had carried the Tuesday 4th July sketch of the waxing crescent at 20 minutes past 9, with a level grace remarkable in a child of her years. The Duke heard her at his level grey-blue gravity, and said only that the Skelbrook Reading School under Augusta's hand should not, at his future asking, be set aside. At the 5th Saturday, Augusta and the Duke had walked the walled south garden of Skelbrook Hall at 4. The cream Yorkshire roses had been set at the careful trellis at the south wall by the Skelbrook gardener in the May. The apple and pear orchard at the west had set its small green fruit at the careful pace of a slow Yorkshire summer. They spoke at the south garden bench of Mr. Locke's Michaelmas audit, set down for the 29th of September. They spoke of the South Library's 412 volumes. The Duke had named at his Cambridge, reading the small folio Herschel that had stood at the lower south shelf since the late Mr. Wentworth's purchase of it at York in 1816. They spoke of the cream-coloured, cotton-bound copy of Mrs. Somerville's manuscript notes that had been forwarded to Augusta at Thirsk in the November of 1818 by the York Reading Circle of Miss Anne Birkdale. Saturday, the 5th of August, 1820 came at the South Parlour at 3. The cool August light fell at the south sash on the dark green parlour rug. Miss Fawcett sat at the second sash with her sewing frame at her knee. Mrs. Tetlow had set the tea tray at the side table and gone out at 25 minutes past 2. The Duke entered the south parlour at the pace of one whose calling hour had been kept 4 weeks together. He carried in his left hand the late 5th Duke's green-leather Cambridge commonplace book. Augusta rose from her armchair. She inclined at him on the parlour rug. The Duke set the commonplace book on the rug at his right hand. He knelt at the measured pace of one whose asking had been long considered. He looked at Augusta in level grey-blue composure. He had not, when he had first seen at Mr. Triggath's hand the late Mr. Wentworth's Galilean Moon Journal at the September 1819 parish school inspection, foreseen this. He had loved her, with what gravity he could, and with what measured patience the 4 months had required, since the south porch of St. Cuthbert's on the Easter Sunday of the 23rd of April. "I have come," he said, "having read with measured admiration the careful Galilean moon record at your hand these 7 years, to ask you to consider whether you might be the next Duchess of Helmsley at the calm settled pace your own quarter-day observations have taught me to admire." She had known him too short a time to be in love with him yet. He should not press her on that. "I shall ask only that you consider the question at your own time, and if your settled answer is yes, I shall do my best at Helmsley Castle and at the South Terrace observing station to deserve it." If her answer were no, his Tuesday and Wednesday and Saturday calls should continue undiminished, and the question should never be raised again. Augusta stood at her armchair on the south parlour rug. The cool August light at the south sash fell on the silvering temple of the kneeling Duke. She looked at him at her level hazel-grey composure. "Your Grace, I shall." The Duke rose at the pace of one whose long-considered asking had been answered. He inclined deeply at her. He took the green leather commonplace book from the rug and set it on the side table. Miss Fawcett at the second sash had set down her sewing frame and stood at her settled height at the south sash, the Yorkshire witness of the calling hour. Lady Cassandra Wakefield was brought down from the Skelbrook Hall nursery at 3:30 by Mary the upper maid. The child had been at Skelbrook these 2 nights at the arrangement made at the Wednesday call of the 3rd of August. She came at the south parlour rug, with her hands at her cream muslin lap. The Duke knelt at his daughter's height and spoke to her in the Cambridge-trained voice he had always kept for her, since she had been a keeping baby of 3 months. He had asked Miss Wentworth, he said, whether she might be Cassandra's new mamma at Helmsley Castle. Miss Wentworth had said she should. Lady Cassandra received the news at her own 5-year-old gravity. She set her hand at her papa's hand. She looked at Augusta at her level grey-blue gaze. She pronounced that she should be glad of a stepmother who read the Galilean moon record at the careful pace her papa read it, and she should be glad of a stepmother who let her look through the Dolland eyepiece at the south library window of a cloudless Tuesday evening. Augusta inclined at the child in level composure. The Dowager Duchess at the Helmsley drawing-room at 6 of the August evening, when the news was carried over by the Duke himself at the 12-mile ride home, set down her own letter to her sister, Lady Charlotte Wakefield, at Bath, and said only that she had foreseen it at the south porch step on the 6th of May. The banns were read at St. Cuthbert's of Skelbrook in the Moors by the Reverend Theophilus Trigath on the Sundays of the 13th, 20th and 27th of August 1820. The Yorkshire parish heard the asking at the south sash window in the order of the Book of Common Prayer. No impediment was raised at any of the 3 readings. Saturday, the 9th of September, 1820, came at the parish of Skelbrook in the Moors at 10 of the cool September morning. The St. Cuthbert's south porch had been swept at 8:30 by Mr. Skell the butler and Daniel the undergardener. The Wentworth family pew at the south aisle was set with the cream Yorkshire roses cut at the walled south garden at 7:30 by the Skelbrook gardener. The Dowager Duchess of Helmsley sat at the front pew at the Helmsley side with Lady Cassandra Wakefield at her right hand. The child wore peach and cream sprigged muslin and the grey-ribboned bonnet of the Wakefield nursery. Lady Adelaide Heatherwood sat at the Dowager Duchess's left hand. Sir Rowland Heatherwood stood at the south porch step at the Duke's side as the groomsman of the morning. Mrs. Tetlow sat at the Skelbrook pew at the south aisle in soft plum bombazine, with Mr. Locke at her right hand and Mr. Skell at his right hand. Miss Tabitha Fawcett sat at her aunt's left hand. The 6 village girls, Anne Skell, Hester Beresford, Patience Moore, Damaris Croft, Lavinia Strickland, Bryony Howe, sat at the parish school pew at the south aisle in their Sunday muslin. Mr. Septimus Hetherington, the York solicitor of 1 in gold-rimmed spectacles and plain dark wool, gave the bride away at the south aisle at the pace of a solicitor whose long acquaintance with the Wentworth family had begun at the late Reverend Augustus's quarter-day correspondence of 1796. Mrs. Sarah Skelton, Augusta's Thirsk friend and reading school principal, stood as matron of honour in soft, dove-grey silk at Augusta's left hand. Augusta came up the south aisle at her 5'7" height. She wore the cream Yorkshire muslin morning gown made for the day by Mrs. Murgatroyd, the Skelbrook village dressmaker. Kind hazel eyes, lace cap, soft dark bombazine. At the bodice, she wore a sprig of late summer moor heather and 1 white and cream rose of the walled south garden. The Wentworth family pearls were at her throat. The long ivory silk gloves were at her hands. At the inner pocket of the gown, she had set her late mother, Mrs. Honoria Wentworth's small silver locket of 1798, which had lain at the parsonage of Thirsk at the south parlour writing desk these 12 years since her mother's death of winter chill in 1808. The Reverend Theophilus Tregarth, parish curate of Skelbrook in the Moors, 49, plain black gown, gold spectacles, stood at the south altar. He read the marriage service of the Book of Common Prayer at his pulpit voice. The Duke at the south altar inclined at his bride. Augusta inclined at her bridegroom. The ring was given. The Yorkshire Register at the vestry was signed by the bride in level italic and by the Duke in measured Cambridge italic. Reverend Tregarth signed at the curate's hand. Mr. Hetherington signed at the witness's hand. Mrs. Skelton signed at the matron's hand. Sir Rowland Heatherwood signed at the groomsman's hand. The wedding breakfast was set at the south dining-room of Skelbrook Hall at 11:30. Mrs. Tetlow had been at the south dining-room at 5 of the September morning, with Mary, the upper maid, and Daniel, the under-gardener, and the Skelbrook kitchen at her settled keeping. The long oak dining table was set with the Wentworth family plate. 24 of the 96 pieces marked York, 1788. The cream Yorkshire roses of the walled south garden were set at the dining table centre at 3 Sèvres bowls. The breakfast went forward at the pace of a morning long considered. Cold Yorkshire ham at the south end, the Skelbrook game pie at the north, the cream Yorkshire curds at the side table, the small seed cake of Mrs. Tetlow's keeping at the long oak sideboard. Mr. Hetherington, at noon, rose at the south end of the long oak dining table and gave the Yorkshire health of the bride and bridegroom at his solicitor's voice. The Dowager Duchess at the north end chair inclined. Lady Adelaide at the east settee inclined. Sir Rowland at the Duke's right hand inclined. Mrs. Skelton at Augusta's left hand inclined. Reverend Tregarth at the southeast chair inclined at his curate's gravity. The health was drunk at noon in the cool September dining-room light. At 1:20, the Duke and the new Duchess of Helmsley took leave at the south porch of Skelbrook Hall. Lady Cassandra, at the Dowager Duchess's hand, inclined at her new stepmamma in the small dignity of her 5 years, and pronounced she should see her mamma again at Helmsley Castle at the Wednesday call. The carriage went out at the lower gate at 1:30, eastward by the Stokesley Road, the 12-mile northeast drive to Helmsley Castle, taken at the even pace of the 2 Cleveland Bay carriage horses of the Helmsley stables. Here ends the chronicle of Miss Augusta Wentworth of Thirsk, who became, by the patient asking of the 6th Duke of Helmsley, the 11th Duchess of Helmsley in the considered Yorkshire fashion her own late grandmother had kept all her days. Silken embrace. Mr. Locke continued at the home farm. Mrs. Tetlow continued at the housekeeper's keys. The quarter-day audit went forward at Michaelmas. Miss Fawcett continued at the South Library evenings. Outside, the North Riding sky turned the colour of slate after rain at the close of the September day, and the first stars of the plough rose careful at 9:30 at the South Library window, where the Dolland refractor had stood since 1815. So, Miss Augusta Wentworth, who had sat in self-possessed silence on the 6th day of January at the chambers of Mr. Hetherington and heard read aloud the last will and testament of the great-uncle she had never met, became, by the patient asking of the 6th Duke of Helmsley, the 11th Duchess of Helmsley, in the considered Yorkshire fashion, her own late grandmother, Mrs. Honoria Wentworth, had kept all her days,